Chapter 1820. With the collapse of Belrock's huge body, almost all beings in the Land of Fire noticed the changes in the Land of Fire. In the unstable space of the Land of Fire, in the misty northern sky, a gigantic palace that reached the clouds appeared on the other side of the seemingly endless sea of lava. It was so majestic and tall that it could support both heaven and earth. It had a grayish-black background, some bright red patterns, and some golden runes. This was obviously not the work of nature. This was the palace where the fire demon king, Ragnaros, resided, the Saffron Palace. After defeating Lord Laeris, Avina was the first to rush back to see if she needed help. Who knew that she would see Belrock fall as soon as she came back? As the demigod with the strongest eyesight, she keenly noticed another change in the Land of Fire. Look! Avina spread her wings and pointed to a hillside that looked like a stairway to heaven, rising higher and higher. At the top of the hillside, there was a huge circular portal. A moment ago, it was just an empty ring, and within the ring, one could see the sea of lava behind it. If anyone were to pass through the ring so foolishly, they would probably fall directly into the magma and be burnt to a crisp without leaving any bones behind. As Belrock fell, the runes on the ring, which were originally like chicken intestines, suddenly shone with a golden light. Under the illumination of the golden light, a portal with a mysterious and evil aura opened. In the center of the portal, in the chaotic and mysterious aura, there was a ferocious skull that kept flashing. No matter who looked at it, they felt that the skull was opening its mouth at them, as if it wanted to swallow them. Everyone was a little uncertain. At this moment, Duque came over, surrounded by hundreds of fire demons. One of the former guardians of the Land of Fire, the demigod hunter Xianxia, humbly bowed to the other demigods and then spoke. That is flame breach. It can lead to Ragnaros' palace. In fact, although the Land of Fire was indeed the core area of the fire elemental plane, it was actually a cage where the titans of the pantheon had imprisoned Ragnaros and some overly ferocious fire elementals that couldn't be completely destroyed in a short period of time. Only through this portal can we reach the core region of the Land of Fire. Major Domo pondered for a moment and added, Ragnaros has been severely injured twice so far, and his soul has become loose. The first time was 25,000 years ago, when the Titans conquered Azeroth. The second time was when you destroyed his doppelganger in the Molten Core. If Master kills Ragnaros in the Saffron Palace, he will be erased from this world forever. A person who betrayed his master for glory was never likable. Most demigods did not like Majordomo, but few knew that he had been forced to surrender by Duque. He didn't care anymore. Anyway, he could only follow Duque all the way to the dark. When Duque became rich, he naturally followed suit. If Duque knelt, he could only follow suit. Therefore, completely ignoring the gazes of other existences, Majordomo revealed this big news that was definitely good for the Alliance army. Duque felt a little good. Duque had had enough of enemies that couldn't be killed no matter what. They would often come back to life and resurrect. He didn't want all his enemies to enter the Eternal War list. Wouldn't it be annoying to have them cause trouble again after 30 or 50 years? Since there was a chance, this time, he had to make Ragnaros kneel and sing Bleak. Let's go! The ferocious skull on top of the fire crevice kept opening and closing as if it was trying to scare the intruder or swallow the intruder in one bite. Duque was not interested in this boring trick of pretending to be scary. To be safe, he, who was best at spatial magic among demigods, naturally reached out a tish and inserted it into the portal. As soon as he touched it, Duque almost laughed out loud. He didn't know if the fire elemental fellows were careless in the first place, or if they were born with low vigilance. They felt that if there really was an enemy, they could easily get rid of the enemy with their strength. Without a butler in such a huge Land of Fire, it felt like Lager was deaf and blind. Duque could clearly sense that Ragnaros didn't even put any of his divine thoughts on the Land of Fire. He didn't even have the thought of being vigilant, let alone being on guard. Lager was trying hard to communicate with the fire elemental elements in the whole of Azeroth, attempting to tame all the fire elemental elements in the world and turn them into his subordinates. No wonder this guy has a total of 2 managers. Duque muttered. Beside him, Major Domo, who had just eaten the ghost web spider queen and had a chance to become a demigod, had been paying attention to his master's words. He was completely baffled by what he heard. He couldn't possibly understand. Duque was talking about him and Fandral Staghelm, who was supposed to be the next manager. Lager was like an illiterate lord. Because he was too uncultured and only knew how to act rashly, all management matters could only be handed over to the managers. Now that history had changed, Fandral Staghelm didn't defect to the enemy, so naturally, there was no more managers. There was also the rather troublesome flame-druid combination in history. One demigod after another passed through the fiery rift. They arrived in front of a huge palace with its doors wide open. "Who are you? This isn't a place mortals are allowed to come." At least a few fire elemental creatures appeared. 2 fat fire elemental flame archons, and 2 lava giants with magma flowing all over their bodies, molten flame fathers, were all the soldiers guarding the gate. They were all high attack, high HP, and hard to deal with lava sputtering. If they were just mortal powerhouses, it might be a little difficult. But Duque had more than half a dozen demigods on his side. The Bear brothers howled and pounced together. There were other wolves faster than them. The wolf god had just lost and was depressed. Because Belloc had taken out 90% of his HP, Goldring was restrained in the latter half of the previous battle, so he naturally couldn't beat Varian. The wolf god was rather unreliable when it came to recognizing other races as his sons, but he was still very principled. He said he wouldn't call him Sun Smash, so he wouldn't. He vented all his anger on the little monsters. Other beings might be afraid of the lava damage from these elite monsters, but Goldring's defense and vitality weren't considered strong among demigods. But before he became the god of the wilderness, he was born as a winter wolf. He walked in the polar regions and was born with frost elements. The surface of his body was surrounded by a freezing aura that was far stronger than the ice barrier of a Breaking Dawn mage, and it was very effective against fire elemental monsters. Chapter 1821. As the saying went, a cat's hands were cheap, while a dog's mouth was cheap. Duke couldn't figure out whether Goldring belonged to the Meow Star family or the Wang Star family. The wolf god was very fast. Mortals could at most attack the father of molten flames with the speed of a tortoise robbing a snail, but Goldring was robbing a snail-level lava giant at the speed of a cheetah. With a single leap he flew up 5 stories high. His 4 claws and mouth attacked at the same time, and with lightning speed he plucked off the lava armor on the giant's arm almost instantly. He had broken through 5 layers of armor as soon as he entered the battlefield. Goldring's white shadow flashed left and right a few times, and the rock giant turned into an ordinary giant with bright lava flowing all over it. Cenarius, who had been depressed by Duque for a long time and had been a babysitter for a long time, had never beaten anyone up before. It was rare for him to show off. He posed in a Vsop centaur pose, raised his front hooves high in the air, and a javelin made of vines automatically formed in his right hand. Cenarius exhaled and shouted, "Huh!" With a loud shout, a green vine spear cut through the scorching sky, like a man taking a piss. It split in half in the air and shot directly into the chests of 2 fathers of molten flames who had stripped off their outer layer of rock. A touch of green rose from the foreheads of the 2 high-level lava giants. It was as if they saw something they had never seen before in their lives, a vast grassland overflowing with green. 4 high-level elites lay dead just like that, leaving only lava residue on the ground. Demigods wouldn't be interested in the corpses of this level of trash. But Shanox's 2 molten hounds were different. They rushed forward eagerly and tasted the delicious flame essence left behind after the death of their compatriots. Without needing Duque to do anything, the group continued to advance deeper into the Saffron Fortress. As a player in his previous life, when Duque entered the fortress, he would complain about who had built such a gorgeous palace for Lager. Later, he found out that it was actually in the style of the Titans. The servants of the Titans were built according to the standards of a prison. This fortress was a prison. But even if it was made into a prison, it was still too beautiful. Most of the doors here were standard circular, and the flame characters on the circular borders gave off a smooth feeling of Latin. The brownish-black floor, paired with a large red round ball, highlighted the identity of the prisoners in this prison. Golden hemispherical braziers could be seen from time to time, with a golden band around them. They looked like a combination of Saturn and its rings. It was quite sci-fi. A fire elemental that looked as strong as Baron Geddon of the Molten Core blocked the only path. If it were 10 years ago, Duque and his hero alliance would have a headache encountering this fellow. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to escape after 20 minutes of intense fighting. However, times were changing. After experiencing many battles, the heroes were also growing rapidly. Especially when the will of planet Azeroth was slowly unlocking the limits of what mortals could achieve, the Lava Dominator, which was equivalent to a boss monster in the Dark Portal for 15 years, was nothing more than an appetizer. Without the demigod taking action, the Alliance heroes would beat it to death. Entering a huge hall, there was only a narrow path leading to the platform in the center of the lava lake. As the Alliance army approached, 2 dark green bugs, Molten Burner and Molten Spitter, suddenly emerged from the lava on both sides of the path. As soon as they came out, they spat directly in the faces of the Alliance warriors. Unfortunately, their attacks couldn't even break through Duque's ice shield. The raven goddess Avienna flapped her wings and casually shot them with a few lightning arrows. Ragnaro's mountain-like figure entered the vision of every powerhouse in the coalition army. He was too huge, so huge that it was impossible to ignore. His lower body was immersed in the lava, and every inch of his skin and limbs exposed to the air was made of golden flames. The metal gauntlets, pauldrons, and breastplates that seemed to be made of black iron were full of earthworm-shaped runes similar to the decorations on the gates of the Saffron Fortress. If his calculations weren't wrong, these should be the shackles that the Titans had left him back then. The aura of a demigod was extremely powerful, not to mention a bunch of demigods. Among the many powerful auras, there were a few that were strong enough to wake Ragnaros up. What? Mortals dare to step into my territory? Ragnaros shuddered. His relatively slow reaction finally caught the soul waves that made him extremely disgusted and angry. Major Domo? Duke Marcus? And Shanox? You traitors! Ragnaros was so angry that even though his words were a bit messed up, his anger directly ignited the intense reaction of every drop of lava and every bit of fire element in the fortress. With his earth-shattering roar, the entire fortress, and even the entire fiery land, could clearly feel the tremors. It was as if a huge ancient volcano was about to erupt in the next second, spewing out terrifying lava that could cover 3,000 kilometers. The 2 fire demon leaders were shocked. They had an almost natural fear of their former master. It was the painful memory of being brutally abused countless years ago, and it was also the accumulated power that couldn't be erased after thousands of years. They were a little scared on the spot. How could Duque give in to them? If they gave in, wouldn't it be a slap in the face to their new master, Duque? Duque smiled. His voice spread out with divine power and instantly spread across the battlefield. Snap. Duque snapped his fingers crisply. The sound wasn't loud, but it was as if the most mysterious switch had been pressed. All of a sudden, the fire elements and surging lava in the entire Saffron Fortress all calmed down. Ragnaros immediately realized that it was Duque who defeated his clone and robbed him of his divinity and control of the elements in the fiery land. Then, he used that control to control the situation. Ragnaros cursed, "You despicable thief." Amused, Duque tilted his head and laughed. "Thief? Why do I clearly remember that I killed my way into your clone's lair, the Molten Core, and killed your clone before openly snatching the power that originally belonged to you? As for you insulting me as a thief, I would like to express my deepest protest. If possible, please call me a thief with divinity." He was just robbing a thief, yet he sounded so righteous and dignified. Several of Duque's women laughed on the spot. Tyrant even smiled brightly, without a trace of the dignified high priestess. While Duque's women were amused, Ragnaros was naturally even angrier. "Robber! Traitor! Destroy all of you! I will watch you burn!" Fire will purify everything. Chapter 1822. Accompanied by Lager's distinctive slogan, he raised the giant hammer in his hand high. The hammerhead alone looked as huge as a heavy tank. It was covered in spikes and surrounded by a temperature of over 10,000 degrees. It was very powerful. Duke knew that this was no longer the hand of Ragnaros the Balrog that Lager liked to use the most. Instead, it was a lower-level hand of scorching destruction. This two-handed hammer was equally powerful, but in theory, it definitely didn't have the terrifying power to kill someone instantly. In fact, it couldn't be calculated that way. The divine artifact, the Balrog hammer, was held in the hands of Lager's clone, so its power was extremely limited. The hand of flaming destruction was an epic weapon, but it was used in the hands of Lager, who was blessed by the fire elements of most of the Land of Fire. In the end, it was hard to say which weapon was more powerful. Of course, there was another saying. The Balrog hammer was the Balrog hammer precisely because it was held in the hands of a Balrog. Only in Ragnaros's hands would this hammer be the genuine Savras. Suddenly, he felt a little lucky that because Magni Bronzebeard had turned into a diamond, the divine artifact, the Balrog hammer, was temporarily passed on to his younger brother, Muradin, and was not present today. If the original Balrog hand had appeared, it was really hard to predict what would have happened. Even Duque didn't dare to take Ragnaros's angry blow head-on. It couldn't be helped. Not every demigod had strong vitality and defense. For example, Medivh did have strong magic power and magic attack power, but when he didn't use a magic shield, he was not much stronger than an ordinary human man. Duque had used 3 elements to completely strengthen his body, but he was a human. No matter how much he strengthened himself, he wouldn't be more durable than a dragon with half his body. When Ragnaros began to spread his fire domain and the other elements couldn't operate well, Duque didn't want to casually break through space and use flash when facing Lager's hammer. A true top expert who had stepped into the divine realm was extremely difficult to fool. Duque couldn't guarantee that his teleportation would be seen through. Therefore, Duque decided to call for help. He circulated his chi in his danton and shouted, "Big bear!" In the next moment, a giant bear that was walking on its hind legs swayed its big bear butt and used charge to knock away Ragnaros, Savras, right before it was about to slam down on it. As he worked, the demigod did not forget to mock Duque fiercely. "How many times have I told you? My name is Ushik." Duque didn't care and shouted again, "Bear too. *CK. My name is User." Although he was cursing, Urso, who had mastered elemental power, pounced on Lager. He pulled out a dazzling purple lightning spear from between his gigantic bare paws and threw it at Lager's lava body. BZZT. The destructive power of the wind element produced by the intense lightning clashed with the fire element on Lager's body. It could be clearly seen that the fire elements on Lager's body flinched and retreated. However, with the support of the fire element that was drawn from his lower body, the fire element immediately gained the upper hand. There were many who knew what was good for them. Cenarius immediately shouted, "We have to separate Lager from the Land of Fire. Otherwise, we will be fighting against the entire plane with our limited power." No matter how strong a demigod was, compared to the vast world, he was just a tiny speck of light. "What do we do?" Tyrant hurriedly asked in Duque's ear. Duque used the system to scan the surrounding environment. He narrowed his eyes and said quickly, "Attack with full force. There is a limit to how fast Ragnaros can replenish fire element from the Land of Fire. As long as our destructive power is faster than his replenishment speed, we can create an opportunity to separate him from the plane." In terms of pure speed, Iwina was the fastest. However, Iwina's strength was in her detection and perception. The one who could truly attack quickly was the wolf god. Goldring ran quickly on all fours. He sprinted close to the ground, looking like he was flying. He was so fast that the lava trap that Ragnaros had set up was indeed triggered by Goldring's claws. However, the wolf god was too fast. The surging lava spewed 3 stories into the sky. The exploding lava could only cover the afterimage of the wolf god as he moved quickly. Closing in on Lager, who only had half of his body exposed, Goldring was not greedy. With his agile body, he approached the Fire Demon King and quickly waved his limbs. His large white claws scratched the air dozens of times. It looked like he was scratching the air, but in reality, his claws had already released a continuous stream of wind blades containing the power of ice towards Lager. Roar! Suddenly suffering from the extremely destructive elemental attacks, even the thick-skinned Lager could not help but roar in pain. Lager raised the Balrog's hammer high again, but he was hit in the right arm by a huge tortoise shell flying at him. He almost lost his grip on Savras and dropped his hammer. After Duke cast an ice shield on him, the tortoise god let out a fart. It was not smelly, but it was especially loud. Poof! The hill-like turtle god flew into the air and smashed towards Lager. The extremely hard turtle shell carried Duke's powerful frost aura, and Lager grimaced from the impact. In his rage, Lager did not care whether Totara did it on purpose or not. He raised his hammer and smashed it at Totara. The tortoise deity retracted his head into the tortoise shell at a speed that seemed slow but was actually very fast. Yes, he relied on his turtle shell to make a living. You can smash it all you want, but if you really break it, it's my loss. After smashing 6 or 7 times in a row, Lager finally came to his senses amidst the pain of being beaten by the other powerhouses. Am I stupid? Why am I hitting a turtle? When the Fire Demon King was about to change targets, the 2 bear monsters raised Totora's turtle shell and threw it at him. Smack! Lager, whose lower body was hidden in the lava, was tragically hit in the face. Lava flowed out of his large nostrils. Could this be the legendary fire element version of Nosebleed? However, this time, Lager was not fooled. Come out, my children. Protect your king. Countless small inverted triangular fire elementals emerged from the edge of the platform where the Fire Demon King was. They rushed out of the pillars of fire and rushed towards the huge hammer, Thuris, that Lager was hammering on the floor. Don't let them touch the hammer! Duke shouted. Ashbringer's bright golden holy light was the first to be unleashed. In less than half a second, all the children of fire on the right side of the platform were wiped out. Imriel stuck out her buttocks as she swung the divine artifact great axe in her hand, which did not fit her size. In a 720-degree arc, happy flames swept across the area, destroying the Son of Fire and successfully absorbing all the fire elemental energy that was escaping from it. Chapter 1823. While the mortal heroes were busy dealing with the Son of Fire, Ragnaros hid. He completely hid his huge body in the lava lake in the middle of the platform. Not only that, but every 4 seconds, a dozen scorching lava arrows would shoot out from the boiling lava lake. Lager, who seemed to be a product of surging lava, actually had a different kind of scheme. He aimed every lava arrow at the heroes and demigods on the platform. Kalia could not dodge in time, and a lava arrow blasted into her body. If she had not swung the Veronel Ancient King's hammer in her hand at the last moment, and the head of the hammer floating above the handle suddenly bloomed with a soft golden light, blocking the blow with a huge shield, Kalia might have been disfigured. This was only a theoretical possibility. Kalia tilted her head and saw that Duke was looking at her. Duke was probably testing her skills and reaction speed. Kalia smiled sweetly at Duque. This was a response to his concern. After so many battles, the clumsy princess was now the main priest of the Alliance's hero group. Unless the enemy was too far apart, normal attacks really couldn't threaten her. No one thought that this scene would be seen by Lager, who was hiding under the lava. The eyes of fire elemental creatures were always just decorations. They didn't really have eyes. What they used to see the world was actually sensing the elements of the world around them. In their perception, the world was roughly and simply divided into 4 elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. The surrounding fire elementals could see the situation, which meant that Lager himself had seen it. Seeing that his plan to summon the Son of Fire into Savras had been ruined, Lager stopped hiding and poked his upper body out of the lava lake. Watch out! The lava lake that the Fire Demon King is hiding in is another space. Duque finally realized. He didn't expect the seemingly reckless and irascible Lager to have such a cunning side. The Saffron Fortress was originally an independent space within the independent space of the Land of Fire. Who knew that there was another freaking space in the space? This kind of overlapping relationship really made one's scalp go numb. So what if I know? In the Land of Fire, I'm absolutely invincible, Lager roared proudly. All of a sudden, the Fire Demon King did something that surprised Duque. This move definitely did not exist in Duque's memories. Unlike in the original history, Ragnaros's momentum at the moment was that he wanted to kill all the invaders. First, he gave it a big slap. His left hand suddenly swept from left to right. Not only did his golden left palm emit a high temperature, but it also sent Urso flying more than 10 meters away. At the same time, it also created a lava wave that was at least 10 meters tall and 20 meters wide. No matter how well-equipped they were and how many fire resistance potions they had prepared beforehand, no mortal hero would be willing to bathe in the suffocating, invisible lava. That kind of deadly heat in the darkness would cause nightmares after just one. The veteran team members who had experienced the Battle of the Molten Core all retreated in a hurry, just like William. He had already rushed to the side of the lava lake and used the holy sword wind created by the dual sword artifact to slash at Lager's waist. Lager swung it horizontally, and he had no choice but to jump out of the attack range of the lava wave. Unexpectedly, this was a feint. Lager didn't intend to use this move to hurt anyone. All the previous actions were just to cover for the fire demon hammer that he had pulled behind him and raised high. Cenarius, who was at the outermost part of the platform, saw everything clearly. He immediately exclaimed, "Be careful." It wasn't that they didn't want to be careful. A fire giant whose upper body was 10 stories tall was extremely fast and terrifying. Anyone who had faced it before would know how terrifying it was. If it was just a simple physical attack, it would be terrifying enough. Not to mention, before this attack, Ragnaros had forcefully used his greater control of the elements to push away all the other elements on the platform. When the fire element was more than 99% dominant in a certain space, using other elemental magic would become a joke. If one wasn't a demigod, they probably wouldn't even be able to activate a life-saving skill like Ice Barrier. When Lager did this, Duque already felt that something was wrong. He also had a share of control in the fire elemental realm. Unfortunately, after the Land of Fire was connected to Azeroth and was replenished with new fire elements, his share was indirectly diluted. Even if he killed a few leaders and secretly snatched the elements in the Land of Fire, Duque's control of the fire elements in Lager's lair would not exceed 20%. Duque didn't know who Lager was going to attack. As a demigod of the magic net who made a living by controlling elements, Duque's first priority was to seize control of the elements nearby. He regained control in half a breath, and it even reached about 40%. However, Lager's all-out attack had already arrived. At this moment, Duque finally realized that Lager's target was Kalia. In a team battle, get rid of the opponent's healer first. This was common sense, and there was nothing wrong with it. Duque also knew that if he were in Lager's shoes, he would do the same. However, when Lager's, Savra's, Balrog smashed towards Kalia, Duque was still furious. Lager! F***CKU, time seemed to have stopped. At this moment, there were actually many people who ran over to save the situation. Ashok sprinted over, his bear-like body already flying into the air with his limbs off the ground. On the other side, William brazenly activated the warrior profession skill Assist. His body turned into a stream of light and rushed towards Kalia. As long as he could catch up, he would block this attack for Kalia even if he had to cross his swords to block it. However, everyone knew that both of them were half a beat too slow. Based on the attack speed and trajectory, the Balrog hammer would hit Kalia before they could. How was a human priest going to block this huge hammer that weighed more than 100 tons and contained a huge amount of fire elements? The answer was definitely that she couldn't. Just when everyone thought that Kalia's body would explode and she would die from this blow, Duque made his move. Pharaoh was never known for his defense. Even though Duque was a demigod, he didn't have the body to block Lager's full-powered physical attack. Duque had his own way of dealing with Duque. Unknowingly, his divine artifact sword had merged with his staff once again. A strange divine artifact spear turned into a gorgeous arc of light and pierced the bottom of Lager's Balrog hammer. Chapter 1824. The momentum of Ragnaros's hammer was absolutely astonishing. However, when a landslide would not affect anyone, no matter how powerful it was no different from fireworks. All that was left was a spectacular sight. Oh, and a bang! Duque had never thought of facing an enemy like Lager, who was both an elemental and a strength type. His spear strike was similar to Tai Chi, which was able to move 1,000 kilograms with little effort. He did not deliberately block it. Instead, he used the simple principle of leverage to cause Lager's hammer to miss. When the spear struck, the end of the hammer's handle rose slightly, and the huge hammer head fell down in advance. In order to prevent the Allied forces from protecting Kalia, Lager did not hold back in this hammer strike. This also meant that he had lost all room for adjustment. The hammerhead that was as big as a house came crashing down. Just the hard quadrangular protrusions on the hammerhead brushed past the outside of Kalia's body, and the protection blessing that Lager had thrown at Kalia shattered. In the face of a higher level of absolute destructive power, the so-called protection blessing that could protect teammates from physical damage for a certain period of time was nothing more than a joke. When Kalia hurriedly retreated, a strand of blonde hair that had been hanging in front of her left chest rose as she leaned back. Because it was out of the protection range of Holy Word, shield, it only brushed past and was instantly turned to ashes by the flames of Savras. After narrowly escaping death, all that was left was fear. Lager roared angrily and unwillingly raised 3 fingers on his left hand. Dozens of sparks of various sizes suddenly lit up on the ground around Kalia. This was a battle in a world of flames. Flying sparks and splashing lava droplets were nothing out of the ordinary. Existences with weaker elemental sensing would be hit by it in minutes. This wasn't some Mars. It was a highly variable, molten core. If left alone, it would absorb the fire elements in the surroundings within 1 to 2 seconds and turn into molten hellfire, turning the surroundings into a purgatory. Unfortunately, Lager was facing Duque, who had the strongest elemental sensing in the world. After dodging Lager's counterattack, Duque waved his hand, and the sparks that had just begun to light up disappeared without a trace like chalk being erased from a blackboard. Humph! Lager snorted coldly. Only now did Kalia truly feel a lingering fear. Her pure and pretty face instantly turned deathly pale. It seemed like Lager's attack had come to an end, but who would have thought that a scream would come from midair? No one noticed it until a scream rang out. Everyone looked over and saw that the Raven Goddess was bathed in flames and had fallen head first. From the looks of it, he didn't fall onto the platform, but into the lava lake in the distance. No one knew what had happened. Only Duque, through the records of the system elf, could see from the quick replay that Lager had used the moment he missed Kalia's attack to smash his hammer into the lava lake, creating a huge wave of lava that was tens of meters high. His ferocious attack had paralyzed Avina, making her think that it was just the aftermath of his attack. Who knew that his left hook would suddenly appear in the middle of the huge wave? Without any buffer, Avienna, who was in mid-air, took Lager's punch. "I'll go save her." The agile wolf god flew away and left the battlefield. With the momentum of his wave-like subtle steps, his claws barely touched the surface of the lava lake outside the platform as he sprinted across the lake. With a gorgeous pounce, he managed to catch Avienna before she fell into the lava. For a second, Duque almost wanted to warn Avienna, "Grow wretchedly and don't be reckless." No matter what, this was the first demigod that Lager had crippled. Soon, the second demigod that had retreated was born. No one had expected it to be Tortola. The turtle god also had his limitations. He was very strong in pure defense. What everyone had to consider was that his original body was a turtle. After leaving the familiar ocean and coming to land, his strength was slightly discounted. When he reached the land of fire, he had to give another 50% discount. His defense against physical attacks was indeed impressive, but Savra's main attack method was the fire element. Duque had already been continuously injecting frost elements into Tortola's body to offset the power of the fire element, but he had received too much fire element. When he couldn't expel it from his body, Tortola's demigod body was directly affected. His tortoise skin was drying and cracking, and his limbs were becoming sluggish. In the end, he couldn't even stand. Like a billiard ball, Lager hit his turtle shell horizontally and sent Tortola flying near the fortress gate. Shocking! Lager had seen through Tortola's weakness, slow movement. The turtle god's movements were slow due to a lack of water. Who knew how long it would take for him to crawl back to the center of the battlefield? That guy's turtle shell was measured in tons. Apart from him, who could carry such a large turtle shell back? Perhaps the Bear Brothers could. The important thing was that the Bear Brothers had already taken over Tortola's position and became the main MT. Duque frowned. With the support of the entire plane, Lager's combat strength was a little beyond imagination. Duque, are you done yet? Cenarius was already a little anxious. One's personality determined one's fighting style. Duque's personality of planning before taking action meant that he wasn't the type to attack fiercely the moment he appeared, unless he had the ability to absolutely crush his opponent. Contrary to the way he instantly killed the broodmother Beth Tillich, after Duque started fighting, he spent most of his time throwing frost arrows unhurriedly and occasionally saving the situation. In fact, Duque was taking drastic measures to fight with Ragnaros for the elemental dominance of the Saffron Fortress and even the entire Land of Fire. Not every demigod had the ability to multitask like him. Most powerhouses could only focus on one thing at a certain time. Lager was desperately defending against the attacks of many demigods in reality, so he couldn't focus on controlling the elemental dominance over a wide area. In a sense, Duque was fiercely waving his hoe and trying to take advantage of Lager's weakness. Duque was generally very successful. The only problem was that Lager's control over the elements was extremely rough. Generally speaking, the most standard way to fight for elemental dominance was to inject one's will into the elemental energy mass. When the element completely acted according to one's will, one would obtain the control over that element. It was a competition of the resistance and invasion of one's will. However, Lager didn't fight against Duque at all. Invasion of Duque's will? Alright. Lager directly gave this mass of elemental energy to Duque. The next second, he directly used an even greater amount of fire elements to break Duque's control over that mass of energy. To achieve elemental dominance, there was a minimum amount of will that needed to be injected per unit volume. What Lager did was to continuously hurt people with his own will. More and more fire elements rushed in at high speed, constantly diluting Duque's willpower, so that Duque couldn't form absolute control over any of the fire elements. Chapter 1825. For a short period of time, Ragnaros was indeed able to effectively resist the invasion of Duque's will. He did not give up control of the fire elements. However, Duque's will never stopped invading. As time went on, when Lager was unable to inject more fire elements to maintain a diluted state, or if he used elements that Duque had not invaded to replace them, Duque would seize control of the entire Land of Fire much faster than before. This was a classic double-edged sword. Lager was betting that he could get rid of Duque and his gang before Duque seized power. To be honest, at this point, Duque was no longer in a hurry. Lager's method was actually very much in line with his fiery temper. Pure fire element was like a one-shot attack. If he could not kill the enemy, he would die of exhaustion. In a sense, fire element was not very compatible with Duque's temperament. Duque was completely relying on his rich knowledge of thermodynamics as a transmigrator and the help of the system to snatch the meat from Lager. If it was just a simple battle between Duque and Lager, Duque might really be exhausted to death by Lager, who had more resources and the geographical advantage. Unfortunately, since Lord Lager loudly said that he wanted to burn the entire Azeroth to ashes, then don't blame the will of the planet Azeroth for sending a bunch of big shots to kill you. The four major elemental realms approached Azeroth and broke through the spatial barrier. In turn, Azeroth instructed Isra to resurrect more demigods to fight back. This was originally a counterattack in line with the will of the planet. As Duque began to suppress Ragnaros in the amount of elements in the Land of Fire, Lager was busy dealing with Duque and did not have the time to use fire elements to repel other elements. This also indirectly freed a certain demigod. Lager wanted to win quickly, but he was being too presumptuous. The demigod team had Cenarius, the super healer, on their side. Body-devouring flames. Ragnaros raised his hand and immediately covered 1/3 of the platform with flames. Several mortal heroes and demigods who couldn't dodge in time were bathed in flames. Tranquility. Cenarius raised both his arms and used a powerful healing skill to restore all of his HP back to full. Fiery world. Lager turned his surroundings into a sea of fire again. Tranquility. Meteor strike. Lousy still, ning. Quiet. I don't care if Lager's moves are ever-changing, Cenarius will just use tranquility to counter it. Who cares if I'm a poisonous healer or a real healer? In any case, the powerful natural healing skill had never stopped on any of the powerhouses. Of course, Lager knew that in a group fight he had to kill the healer and healer first. After Kalia almost got into an accident, Ashik and User could be considered to have seen through Lager's thoughts. They did not do anything but stood in front of Cenarius, ensuring that they could catch the sledgehammer with their bare hands. The two bear monsters had thick hides and flesh, and they were able to withstand Savra's attack, not allowing Cenarius to be injured in the slightest, nor was his spell casting interrupted. These three demigods were not the only ones that Lager had to deal with. The raven goddess rested for a while, then spread her wings and flew into the air to attack again. Tortola took a breath and began to prepare for battle again. The wolf god Goldrin's attacks did not stop. This did not even include the attacks of the other mortal powerhouses. Theon, Varian, Hoof. These mortals wielding divine artifacts were not the least bit inferior to the demigods in terms of attack power. Lager wanted to use the Sons of Flames and Sons of Lava to deal with the mortals, but he helplessly realized that his underlings were no match for these mortals. Even without these big shots wielding divine artifacts, the other mortal powerhouses were enough to beat these small fire elementals into pieces. What was even more disgusting was Duque. As Duque's willpower spread through the fire elementals, Lager began to be unable to use the fire elementals to disperse the other elements into the surrounding space through the void. Using a high concentration of elements to disperse the other elements also meant that willpower had entered. Duque wanted to fight against Lager's willpower, so if Lager used his own willpower to fill in the gaps, wouldn't that be exactly what Duque wanted? Pure violence could not kill the demigods on Duque's side. Even if they were injured, they would not die. After a short while, even if they were on the verge of death, they would revive on the spot and continue to fight Lager. Lager felt a little powerless to fight for the control of the elements. As Lager's control over the fire elementals decreased, Cenarius, who rarely used spells other than the nature element, began to use ice element spells. As the leader of the nature element, Cenarius did not only know nature element spells. In fact, he could use many spells that were beneficial to the natural world. Torrential rain suddenly came and extinguished many of Ragnaros' flames. Duke, who had his hands free, summoned quite a number of ice barriers, and even huge ice walls. Any living meteors summoned by Ragnaros would perish as soon as they entered the range of the ice barriers. Unknowingly, the scales of victory were tilting towards Duque's Azeroth powerhouses. This time, Lager finally felt a great threat. He realized that even in his own lair, he would not be a match for these ferocious demigods in a head-on battle. An indignant roar reverberated throughout the entire fortress. Lager's roar shook the eardrums of every powerhouse. Bastards! Do you think this is the end? The land of fire is mine. All the fire elementals in this world are mine too. No one can steal my power. Despicable thief, Duke Marcus. I'll fight you now. It seemed like Lager was ready to fight Duque alone. Unexpectedly, he was as ferocious as a tiger, but in the end, he was a coward. Ragnaros actually used the gigantic Savras to sweep it horizontally, forcing back all the demigods and humans who were close to him. Then he dove into the lava lake again. However, this was not as simple as sneaking in to recover his HP. Instead, he was attempting to enter the most mysterious and heavily guarded independent space in the fire elemental realm. Without being disturbed by the outside world, he would focus on seizing control of the fire elemental realm from Duke. Oh no, that coward is running away. Although Duke had long expected that Lager would be a coward, he did not expect that this guy would actually want to run away in the third stage. Duke really wanted to yell, "Director! This villain is acting on his own instead of following the script." Fortunately, Duke is not alone. Behind him, there were many people doing odd jobs. When Duke held Atish and used the power of space to block the entrance of the lava lake where Ragnaros dived into, the other demigods exerted their strength. Briar and Bramble stretched out their huge claws, and their four bare paws directly grabbed the entrance that Lager was trying to close. They would not close it no matter what. Chapter 1826. Good job. Cenarius waved his hands and made a fishing gesture. A thick vine appeared out of thin air and flew into the middle of the lava lake. A vine that was not much thicker than a person's thigh was thrown into the churning lava lake that was at least 10,000 degrees Celsius. No matter how one looked at it, it was no different from throwing a meat bun at a dog. Under normal circumstances, everyone would be able to see this vine turn into a rope of fire. However, in a battle between demigods, it was never a test of form, but a contest of divine power. Be it energy or elements, there had never been absolute restraints. After obtaining the even more mysterious and powerful Titan force in the universe, everyone was even more clear that all the different types of elements were just different manifestations of energy. Under certain conditions, elements could transform into each other. If not for the fact that everyone had worked together to weaken Lager's vitality to a certain extent, and Duque had stolen a lot of Lager's elements while everyone was besieging Lager, Cenarius would never have let the vine, which had condensed most of his divine power, be thrown into the lava lake. The plant element was already at a disadvantage against the fire element. Now, it was completely different. Even though it was a vine that was thrown in, Cenarius could completely feel that the lava would silently separate after touching his vine. It felt like what he had thrown in was not his own vine of life, but a real fishing line on a fishing rod. Around the fishing line was not the terrifying lava that could destroy the world, but ordinary clear water. It was as easy as fishing in a small river in the Grey Valley Forest. If Ragnaros, the Fire Demon King, was also considered a fish, then he must be a big fish. A super big fish. Originally, it was absolutely impossible to see one's own fingers in the lava. The Logia vine had no detection ability at all in there. Under the guidance of Duque's fire element spy, the vine that was connected to Cenarius' life and soul easily found Lager, who had not dived too deep. It smoothly tied a slippery knot on Lager's neck and directly pulled Ragnaros' body. "I caught him! Come and help!" Cenarius yelled. Apart from Duque, who was still leaning on Atish and focused on preventing the spatial rift from closing, almost all the demigods rushed to Cenarius' side. The turtle god Tatora arched his body and made his turtle shell the fulcrum of the vines. Xiongda and Xiong-Er were the strongest. They grabbed the vines and pulled them out like a tug-of-war. Goldring's strength was not too weak. He bit at the very end of the vine and used all his strength to pull it towards the walkway leading to the platform. What was hilarious was that the demigod fire demon hunter Shanox, who had been watching from afar and was too embarrassed to do anything, or rather, he was afraid of angering Lager, his old master, but he also came to help. As the saying goes, everyone kicks a wall when it's down. Lager relied on his gigantic physique, which was at least 10 stories tall, to begin with. However, there were too many demigods here. Apart from the Raven Goddess and Cenarius, who were slightly weaker in strength, the others were all demigods with decent strength. As the saying went, who could be blamed for challenging the entire world in a moment of excitement? With the combined efforts of the group of demigods, Lager could not even be a coward this time. He was directly pulled out of the final safe haven. "I'll separate him from the land of fire," Duque yelled. The involvement of Cenarius and the other demigods undoubtedly separated Lager's god. While Lager was busy struggling in the lava lake, Duque suddenly increased the pace of his attacks. Many mortal heroes noticed that the lava lake that Lager had dived into had started to cool down. Even though they could still see the golden light shining from below, the surface of the lava lake had undoubtedly started to solidify. It was a grayish-black color that appeared after volcanic ash cooled down. The next moment, Lager's gigantic upper body was pulled out of the lake. In the center of the lake that was starting to cool down, Lager discovered that he could not break free from the damned vines, so he simply broke through the rock wall and stepped out with one leg. Then he used the other leg. Before the lava completely cooled down and solidified, Ragnaros's entire body finally appeared on the platform. When his gigantic body was pulled out by the vines, Hoof exclaimed when she saw Lager's appearance. "Oh my god! Lager was actually pulled out by you guys in his underpants." It would have been better if she had not said that. Now that Hoof said that, the group of Alliance heroes burst into laughter. Back in the day, Lager's clone was so high-end and magnificent. His burly upper body, domineering bracers, armor, and breastplate, the gigantic fire demon warhammer that seemed to collapse mountains every time he waved it, and his lower body was constantly spinning like a fire tornado. Ragnaros, who was in the molten core, undoubtedly gave everyone a supreme epic feeling. The description of the fire demon king from the heroes made countless busybodies in the tavern sigh with emotion. The children who worshipped the heroes were also moved. What the hell was this Lager? It would have been fine if they did not look at his lower body. One look and they felt that he was not just one level lower. Although everyone could imagine that he was a humanoid creature with 2 hands and 2 legs, this Lager was only wearing a pair of short metal underpants, and his crotch armor was like a huge black iron anchor that was swinging around. It was easy to think of things like tiger penis or elephant penis. Forget about that. Compared to Lager, who was wrapped like a conical bucket, it was easy to think that Lager was actually like a sissy in a skirt who suddenly shyly went back to his room. Originally, he thought that the room was too hot, and in order to cool down, he only wore underpants and wandered around his room. It was at this moment that a bunch of unromantic bastards grabbed him out of his little nest and wanted to beat him up. This was really out of character. "You've angered me. You've really angered me. I'll come out now and crush all of you into ashes." Lager's threat might sound powerful the first time, but after hearing it for a while, it sounded like the laments of a defeated dog. He. At some point, the mortal heroes had already started to surround him and sneer. All the demigods were even more eager to fight. If Ragnaros was connected to the land of fire and had endless elemental energy to replenish himself, perhaps no demigod here could defeat him. However, when no one called for external help and only used their own stored energy to have a fair duel, then there really were a few demigods who lived up to Lager's name. Son, watch Daddy's performance. It was not that Goldring did not mean to break his promise, it was just that he had suffered for a long time, and in a moment of excitement he had forgotten. Chapter 1827. It had to be said that the wolf god's all-out attack was quite ferocious. At least in the first round, Lager could not keep up with Goldring's speed at all. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Dozens of claw shadows tore through the air and quickly streaked across the void, imprinting themselves on Lager's huge body and causing him considerable damage. Ragnaros was not an earth elemental giant, and he did not have a body that could knock the teeth out of dragons. Other than the few metal armor on his body, Lager was dressed like a berserker. If he changed to a shield and changed his hammer to a spear, he would look like a Spartan with 300 red underpants. In a rage, Lager swung his hammer at Goldring. Unfortunately, the difference in size and speed made Lager look like a human lord trying to deal with a white mouse that had crawled all over his body. The waist between Lager's breastplate and belt was as big as a racecourse for Goldring. If Lager had focused all his attention on Goldring, the Bear Brothers would have already arrived. "Oh ha! Two pairs of bare paws flew up and down, each of them able to hit a large patch of lava from Lager's waist. When Lager tried to send these two huge opponents flying with a sweep, it was tortoise god Totora's turn to face his hammer. When he released a large-scale fire spell, it was Duque and Iwaina's long-range attacks. Iwaina's attack power was limited and could only be considered a nuisance at most. Duque, the thief who had stolen the origin of fire, was the one who was aggressive. Just think about it, even Cenarius had started casting frost spells. How could Duque, the demigod of the weave, not attack? A terrifying icicle large enough to make Orgrimmar the main beam of the Great Hall of the Great Chieftain appeared out of thin air and stabbed straight at Lager. The 15-meter-long icicle was sharp at the front and thick at the back. It was a fatal nail. Lager could imagine that if he was stabbed by this icicle, he would be in big trouble. The icicle contained terrifying frost elements, and he felt as if Duque had forcefully compressed an entire iceberg into this icicle. Meteor! He could no longer care about anything else. A huge, fiery meteor suddenly solidified in midair. With extreme precision, it struck Duque's icicle from above. A victorious smile appeared on Duque's face. "I'm not afraid that you won't fight back, I'm only afraid that you won't accept my challenge." To condense a fireball, one needed to inject willpower. Duque was such a scoundrel. As soon as Lager put his will in, Duque's willpower would follow. The two wills launched a fierce attack in the air in a way that mortals couldn't see. One side was furious. One side was a grindstone made of flesh and blood. It spun continuously like a tornado, grinding away at Lager's willpower. Lager was a veteran demigod and the only master of the fire elemental realm for tens of thousands of years. His strength was unquestionable. Unfortunately, as the saying goes, 2 fists are no match for 4 hands. The icicles that Duque threw at him were enough to keep Ragnaros busy. Not to mention the demigod fire demon hunter who was trying his best to please his new master, 6 gods of the wilderness, and more than half of the mortal hero group. Countless injuries were left on Ragnaros' burly and huge body. For a moment, he wished that his body was covered in armor. Then, he wouldn't have to suffer so many physical injuries for no reason. Right now, he was like a water bag riddled with holes. Magma was gushing out from almost every corner of his body. In the past, the magma was just a part of his body that he constantly replaced. Now, it was his life force that would never return. "Marcus?" Ragnaros let out the loudest roar since the start of the battle. He raised his Savra's warhammer high and bent his body backward. He didn't even notice that the middle finger of his naturally extended left hand was bitten off by Goldring. Lager was going all out. Right at this moment, the space that was filled with red and yellow was dyed with a more dazzling golden line. Duque disappeared. A mage's most common spell was Flash. For 99% of the mages in the world, Flash was only a spell used for escaping. Even after Duque transmigrated, it had been like this for a long time. This time, it was a little different. Between the afterimage that he left at the place where he used Flash and the figure that appeared in the air behind Lager after he flashed, there was a thin golden line connecting the afterimage and the body. Only the top demigods who paid the most attention to the overall situation would notice that there was a hole in Lager's seemingly thick and hard black metal breastplate, a hole that could allow a human to pass through. Through this hole, the thin golden line continued to extend backward. It pierced through the northern wall of Sapron Fortress outside the huge lava lake and even the spatial barrier of the Land of Fire. At this moment, on Duque's Song of Light and Shadow, there was a fist-sized crimson bead. It wasn't quite right to call it a bead, because those with sharp eyes, such as the crow goddess Iwaina, were surprised to see that the bead was contracting and expanding like a human heart. It was pulsating. It was similar to the beating of a heart. If one was observant enough, they would notice that as the bead was pierced, its pulsation became slower and slower, and the pulsation became smaller and smaller. Cenarius couldn't believe his eyes. Ragnaros, whose chest had been pierced, finally showed a second expression other than anger. It was a look of horror and fear. Lager let out a scream that didn't match his usual deep voice. No, a very strange scene happened. He thought that as the king of fire demons and the ruler of the land of fire, Ragnaros's death would be grand and heroic. Even if it was **T. It should be a big explosion. A mushroom cloud or something. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. When Duque stabbed Ragnaros with his sword and took away the last 1% of his HP, Lager's death only melted like a candle under high temperature. The 10-story tall body turned into the most common form of lava in the land of fire. It began to melt and flow in all directions, flowing back into the lava lake through the holes on the platform. His pauldrons, breastplates, and bracers, which weighed at least 100 tons, all slid down along the melting body and finally fell off the body of the king of fire demons. The earthworm-shaped runes on the equipment that were once shining dimmed. If it weren't for the huge equipment that still retained the appearance of the Titans, one would even think that they were natural scrap metal and not the equipment of the once glorious king of fire demons. Chapter 1828. To the veterans of the hero team. Oh, the veteran team members, this was just another feat worthy of praise by the Great Alliance hero team. At least this time, the bard in the tavern could officially change the killing of Lager's clone from 10 years ago to killing the Fire Demon King. The wilderness demigods who were working with the hero team for the first time could not help but open their mouths wide. They did not seem to believe that Lager was killed just like that. Looking at the flame bead that was probably the core of Lager's soul on the divine weapon rapier, Cenarius still did not seem to believe it. Ragnaros has been completely destroyed? A ball of flames suddenly spewed out from under the platform, giving everyone a fright. Unexpectedly, the flames that sprang out were as docile as a puppy, supporting Duque's feet with incomparable gentleness. Duque took the opportunity to sit back, and the pillar of flames suddenly transformed in less than 1/10 of a second, becoming a pure flame throne. A brand new crown formed by the purest fire elements was crowned on Duque's forehead. Sitting on the brand new flame throne, Duque used his divine will, and the throne made a gorgeous turn on its own. Duque was now facing his companions who had come to challenge Lager, as well as the demigods. Every powerhouse could not help but purse their lips or move their lips, quietly waiting for Duque to speak. Duque tilted his head thoughtfully, because both he and the other existences heard a funny voice. "No, you can't destroy me. I am the eternal king of fire. I am the terminator of all things in the world." Duque put Ish back into the space storage bag and used his free left hand to pluck the flame bead that had not completely stopped beating. One could feel the violent wrath of thousands of vengeful spirits gathering on it. It was an irrepentant irritation. It was an eternal roar. Duque's lips curled into a smile. "Yes. Very good. As expected, this is the real Fire Demon King. I'll be very disappointed if you suddenly admit defeat at the very end." Duque looked into the eyes of the two fire demon leaders and saw the desire and fear in their eyes. However, they quickly recognized their situation and bowed their heads deeply to Duque. As traitors, all the fire demons had complicated feelings. On the one hand, they wanted Duque to completely destroy Ragnaros, so that their history of being a traitor would be completely annihilated and no one would ever come to take revenge on them. Majordomo Executus, who was well aware of the balance of power, knew that if Duque spared Lager's life, it would be a standard imperial study. A traitor, a person who had been betrayed and surrendered. This kind of natural opposition doomed the fire demon's future to be miserable. It was not that Duque had no precedent of forcing a demigod of a foreign race to surrender. Not to mention others, the Kiraji twin emperors were the best example. For a moment, Shanox wanted to say something to see if he could urge Duque to destroy Lager. Instead, it was Majordomo who grabbed this powerful but not so smart former subordinate. Majordomo shook his head almost imperceptibly. Duque looked at the two fire demon leaders who had lowered their heads, smiled, and crushed the lava core that carried the last of Lager's soul. But no. For a moment, an unprecedentedly violent impact of the soul and divinity directly blasted into Duque's spiritual world. The next moment, the sky and the earth changed color. The lava at the bottom of the platform, the runes around Saffron Fortress, and even the lava that splashed on the surrounding walls, all dimmed at this moment. It was very obvious that the temperature of the air began to drop. Even without Duque's ice shield, the temperature of the surrounding environment was still unbearably high, but the terrible pressure that could destroy everything at any time was gone. In a broad sense, the Land of Fire was a very vast place. After the Land of Fire overlapped with planet Azeroth, it occupied at least the entire southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. On the defense line close to the north, a large number of low-level and mid-level fire elemental creatures were crazily attacking the defense line formed by Guardian Hyjal, the Night Elves, and the Dalajan Mages. Unlike the casual leveling at the beginning, as the Land of Fire further integrated with the world, the stability of the space brought more mid-level and high-level fire elemental creatures. In fact, the defense line was already tight in many places, and was even broken at one point. It was all thanks to the elite mages and mages sent by the Dalajan Mages to retake the position. Suddenly, all the fire elemental creatures stopped attacking. They could not even fight back in the face of the allied army's attack. Not only the fire elemental creatures, but all the soldiers of the allied army who had a certain level of elemental perception felt an inexplicable throbbing in their hearts. Be it the allied army or the fire elemental creatures, they all turned their heads and looked towards the south. In the impression of mortals and fire elemental creatures, the Land of Fire was always a world of jumping and violent activity. There were erupting volcanoes everywhere, and rivers of lava would suddenly appear across the land, attacking other fire elemental creatures. It was a place of intense combat that was countless times more brutal than the law of the jungle. However, what entered their eyes now was a world filled with bright colors, but it was peaceful and still. From an incredibly intense and dynamic scene, it had turned into a world that was almost still. Such an exaggerated transformation was only due to the dissipation of a supreme will. The world of fire elemental creatures became quiet and serene. The entire world of fire seemed to have calmed down, obediently and silently prostrating towards the new Lord of Flames. It was practically the most humble servant. On the Flame Monarch, Duque widened his eyes. Anyone could see that a ball of golden flames was burning in Duque's eyes, growing stronger and stronger. Duque could clearly feel that his will, which had once been difficult to advance in this world, could now soar freely and extend as it pleased. At this moment, all the new mages connected to the weave could feel the laws of fire magic in the entire weave undergoing a huge change. Not long ago, fire magic had always required the most spiritual force out of the three main types of magic. It was like a free wild horse, refusing to be enslaved in any way. Now, powerful fire elemental creatures seemed to be fearful as they lowered their prideful heads towards the mages. Not long ago, due to the conflict between Ragnaros and Duque, every mage had a strict limit on the quantity and quality of fire magic they could use each day. Now, new energy had been injected. The master of this mighty magic network, Duke Marcus, had officially announced that the entire fire elemental plane would be under the control of the weave. From today onwards, fire magic and spiritual force will be sold at half price. Duque announced. Chapter 1829. Whether it was the mages on duty far away in Northrend, the various posts in the Eastern Kingdom, or the mages at the front lines of Mount Hyjal, they all welcomed Duque's policy of having the price of mental strength for fire magic. All along, the destructive power of fire magic had been the undisputed leader among the three elements. But in this life, because Du had led a team to fight against Ragnaros' clone in the Molten Core and created the magic net, the use of mental strength for fire magic was much higher than in history. Unfortunately, there was a limit to the number of times it could be used. Now that the price of mental strength for a fire spell was halved, the cost-effectiveness of fire magic was far higher than that of ice and arcane magic. It could be imagined that from today onwards, there would be more followers of the Five Fireball Church. This was just the benefit of selling themselves to Pharaoh for the magic net. The greater benefit was at the defensive line of Mount Hyjal. I know that the mages at the front lines have made outstanding contributions and great sacrifices in order to protect the world. As the new master of the Land of Fire, I allow you to contract these fire elemental creatures as you wish, as long as it doesn't exceed your own mental strength. Duque's announcement sent the entire Daoist into another kind of uproar. The development of magic changed with each passing day. Ever since the battle at the Molten Core, the Daoist mages led by Duque had greatly strengthened the spell, Summon Water Elemental. The summoned water elemental creatures would improve along with the master's strength. Of course, the main reason was that as the master, the spellcaster had greater control. Another important reason was that Duque had negotiated a mutually beneficial deal with the Daoist water elemental. The Daoist water elemental would summon its people and compatriots to respond to the summons of the magic net mages. So in this life, Pharaoh's water elemental was definitely stronger than the hordes. Everyone knew that Pharaoh could summon water elemental creatures. As long as the summoning was not cancelled, the water elemental creatures would follow the mages around. Let alone attack, they would even be quiet decorations until the mages gave the order to attack. However, mages never had a spell like Summoned Fire Elemental. It was awkward just thinking about it. Pharaoh, who was an ice mage, could find a water elemental pet. As long as he paid a small amount of spiritual energy, an ice mage could even let the water elemental pet stay by his bed as a guard while he went to sleep. The water elemental was not annoyed. If you wanted to perform, it would quietly watch you act cool. If you wanted it to beat someone up, it would shoot frost arrows. If you wanted it to be a bodyguard, it would beat up whoever beat you up. The water element was so useful that the majority of fire mages couldn't accept it. Fire mages would eat their own food. This kind of misery could only be experienced by the fire elementalist himself. For a long period of time, be it the Alliance or the Horde, they used ice magic more than fire magic. There was no other reason. The survivability of the ice element was much stronger, and it was very useful. Now that Duque had taken control of the Land of Fire and become the master of the fire elemental realm, the entire world of magic seemed to have been turned upside down. It wasn't that there were no fire mages who wanted to use fire elemental creatures as long-term summons. Those imaginative Daoist pioneers even tried to enslave the summoned fire elemental creatures by imitating the warlock's method of enslaving demons. The results were terrible. Fire elemental creatures not only consumed more of Pharaoh's spiritual energy, but more importantly, fire elemental creatures were extremely irritable. If they were unhappy, they would rather self-destruct than listen to a mere mortal's orders. It was this characteristic that made enslavement of the fire elemental essence an unstable, semi-forbidden magic that made it so that I would rather perish than let you off. Of course, it wasn't that fire elemental couldn't be summoned. For example, the shamans were very good at this. Through the fire elemental totem, they could summon the fire elemental for a short period of time to help fight monsters. Short-term summons were different from long-term bodyguards. Moreover, in reality, the shaman's ability to summon fire elemental was extremely limited. They would first contact the fire elemental realm with their spiritual energy, then humbly ask for the fire elemental's help through spiritual communication. Under normal circumstances, the fire elemental totem would be effective. But the fire elemental could ignore you. This meant that the fire elemental totem in this world wasn't very effective in actual combat. Unless it was a radiant moon mage with extremely high spiritual energy, very few people would enslave the fire elemental. Even if there were people who used it, they would mostly use the fire elemental as bombs or walking self-destruct soldiers. Duque's order for the fire elemental to submit to mortals was a completely subversive move. Using their own spiritual energy to attract the fire elemental and condense it into a fireman couldn't possibly have its own will. How could the summoned fire elemental fight? Summoning elemental creatures required constant expenditure of spiritual energy, but conversely, the summoner didn't have to worry about every attack of the elemental creatures. How could one fire elemental compare to two fire elemental creatures? In previous battles, the fire elemental would be at the front while the mages would drink tea at the back. For a moment, the pharaoh at the front line of Mount Hyjal was full of ideas, and all sorts of new tricks were developed almost instantly. Some people contracted 4 fire elemental creatures and really played with 5 fireball gods. Some people contracted more than 10 inferno imps in one go and played with group fire arrows. There were also people who had designs on the molten demon hounds. What the hell? They actually contracted smaller molten demon hounds as mounts. That was so cool that others would die of envy. There was even an ice mage at the Morning Star rank who tried to contract multiple fire elemental creatures. He succeeded, and then summoned a fire elemental and a water elemental at the same time. Unfortunately, before he could truly experience what it felt like to have ice and fire at the same time, the water and fire elemental creatures under him started fighting among themselves. It wasn't a small fight, but a fight to the death. This was amazing. 2 mages had clearly summoned a water elemental and a fire elemental each. Even if they stood at the side, it would be fine. Why did a mage summon 2 elemental creatures of opposite attributes at the same time and start fighting? There were too many things that made the Mount Hyjal defense line a little lively and even messy. If not for the fact that these alliance mages had fought alongside the Night Elves and defended Mount Hyjal to the death not long ago, the old fogies of the Night Elves would have flown into a rage and chased them all away. Don't King cause trouble in our holy mountain. Duque knew a thing or two about the situation outside. He didn't have time to care. It couldn't be helped. If he killed Ragnaros as an outsider, the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Then the fire elemental creatures wouldn't think much of it. Even if Duque and the rest killed all the fire elemental creatures in the entire Land of Fire, it wouldn't matter. Chapter 1830. The characteristics of the Land of Flames meant that new fire elemental creatures would be born here at all times. They would follow the instincts of fire creatures and keep fighting, devouring, and growing. Perhaps in a few years, another Lord of Flames named the Great Logger Screw would be born, and he would bring a large force to Mount Hyjal to cause trouble. If that was the case, the Night Elves would not have peace. This time, it was the king's flag at the top of the city wall. As a demigod, Duque overthrew Logger's rule and injected his will into the entire Land of Flames. The nature was completely different. Duque was the new King of Flames. After Duque killed Logger, no one stopped Duque's will from pouring into the entire Land of Flames. The vast willpower that was as vast as the heaven and earth began to invade the entire Land of Flames unscrupulously. Duque's will was like the roots of a tree, penetrating, rooting, and sprouting into every crevice in the Land of Flames and every place with high concentration of elemental energy. After Duque completely controlled everything, the ancient elemental language with a mysterious rhythm echoed in the entire fire elemental realm. I am the weave demigod Duke Marcus of Azeroth, who controls the 3 major elements of fire, frost, and arcane spells. In the battle with your old king, Ragnaros, it ended with my absolute victory. Now, I hereby declare that I am the only master of the Land of Flames, the supreme ruler of billions of fire elemental creatures. Who agrees? Who objects? Perhaps in the eyes of mortals, Duque had already led outsiders to defeat all the bosses in the Land of Flames. There shouldn't be anyone stupid enough to come and seek death, right? Don't say it. There really is. I, Pyros, will be the first to disagree. I acknowledge your power, but you're not a fire elemental creature. What right do you have to be our king? A rather powerful will rose from the southeast of Saffron Fortress. His will and his voice immediately received the response of many fire elemental creatures. Speaking of which, Duque also felt that he was a bit shameless. After all, he was a human, not a real fire elemental creature. Although Azeroth had accepted him and allowed him to become a demigod that transcended the mortal world, in theory, he had already surpassed the boundaries of human beings. However, racial discrimination was not something that only existed in the human world. It wasn't like people would worship you like a god just because you became a demigod. Look, isn't William also unwilling to call Wolf Papa father? Goldring and William were on the same side. Of course, William couldn't do anything to the wolf god. Duque and this guy who called himself Pyros weren't on the same side. After controlling the Land of Fire, This world of fire would become Duke's backyard. A huge eye opened above the head of the powerful will. It was a pure flaming eye. It was enormous, mysterious, and carried with it an irresistible pressure. This was the terrifying aura from the new Flame King. Duke could clearly see who the opponent was. Pyros was a lava giant. Hot lava flowed all over his body, but he lacked a rock layer that was hard enough to protect his body. However, the temperature of the fire elements on his body wasn't too high. Most importantly, Duke remembered who he was. He was the son of Lord Leolis, who had just been killed and was commonly known as left and right legs by the players. Duke, who was sitting on the flame throne, had a contemptuous smile on his face. Indeed, a family should be neat and tidy, right? His father's corpse hasn't even turned cold, and it's his son's turn soon. This sentence caused the Alliance powerhouses and demigods who were watching this scene from the huge flame screen to reveal a playful smile. Duke flicked his finger, and a huge flaming tornado appeared above Pyro's head. In less than 3 seconds, this huge flaming tornado compressed a massive amount of fire elements at an extremely high intensity. Under the gaze of all the fire elemental creatures within a radius of several kilometers, it turned into a huge fist. The atmosphere was rioting. All the conscious elemental creatures fled the area in fear. Pyros sensed in shock that the power he was familiar with was leaving him, and an even greater and boundless power from the true master of this world of flames was about to descend. This flaming fist wasn't something a little lava giant leader like him could withstand. He didn't beg for mercy, nor did he resist. He just stared blankly as Duke's uncontrollable power dominated and took over the surrounding space. That's right, Duke was showing off his prowess. And he was the chicken that Duke killed to show the still untamed fire elemental creatures of this world. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, the huge flaming fist finally descended. This wasn't a simple physical attack, but an elemental bombardment through and through. A thick pillar of fire that would take 30 people to wrap their arms around connected the ground where Pyros stood with the endless flaming sky. This rather powerful lava giant leader, who should have survived until Return of the Legion, before dying, just like that, his soul and body were reduced to dust in this fiery land. Just like that, Lord Riolis's lineage disappeared from the history of the Land of Fire forever. More flaming eyes appeared in the sky of the Land of Flames. They used their sharp gazes to sweep across all the fire elemental creatures on the scorching land. As the flaming eyes blinked, a sharp voice rang in the ears of every fire elemental creature. Who disobeyed the rule of the new Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? As if he was calling names, Duke sent his majesty and will down on the heads of the relatively powerful second-tier leaders. The mother of Nightmare Spider Bestrak was dead, but that didn't mean that the entire Nightmare Spider race was wiped out. Under the mother of Nightmare Spiders, there was actually a group of powerful Nightmare Spider Lords, and the most outstanding among them was Jurixia. When Duke's will descended on her head, her 6 legs almost instinctively turned to jelly. She knelt on the ground on the spot and curled up into a ball. Jurixia, of course, obeys your rule. I am a servant who serves the Supreme Lord of Flames, Duke Marcus. Very good. Duke's voice came from the flaming eyes. As a powerful Nightmare Spider who obeys me, I grant you the title of Nightmare Spider Mother. But there are other powerful Nightmare Spider Lords. Her grievance only lasted for a second. Suddenly, within a few kilometers of her territory, 5 or 6 miserable screams came at the same time. Those were the final cries of the Spider Mother, who was at the same level as her. Enemies who used to be at the same level as her were instantly turned into ashes. The new Lord of Flames, Duke, was actually so powerful. Chapter 1831. Not daring to struggle or resist at all, the new broodmother kept her curled-up body and offered her humble loyalty to the new master of the Land of Fire in her own way. None of the spiders in this world were trustworthy. Most arachnid creatures had sinister, cunning, and unpredictable characteristics. Duque didn't care, because he wouldn't bother to pay attention to a broodmother who wasn't even a demigod. Since he was the king in the Land of Fire, Majordomo would become the manager of this place again in 10 years. Under one person. Above all others. He was talking about the fire demon supervisor. Moreover, Majordomo used the former broodmother's flame core to become a demigod. How could he be on good terms with this broodmother? Duque didn't say anything and just smiled. He used to think that all the masters in the fire elemental realm had been wiped out. Now he realized that he was taking things for granted. If he didn't control all of the fire elemental realm, he wouldn't have known that Smodron, who was supposed to be one of the 4 elemental lords in the original history, was actually quite powerful at this point in time. He wasn't in the narrow scope of the Land of Fire. Instead, he was near Grey Valley. As a lesser lord, he restrained his subordinates and didn't let too many fire elemental creatures rush into Grey Valley to set it on fire. To the great supreme of fire, I, Smodron, offer my loyalty. The fire elemental lord who looked like the gatekeeper, Belloc, knelt on one knee before the huge eye of fire. Don't you dislike me because I'm a human? Duque's booming voice came from the eye of fire. In my eyes, fire elemental creatures are no different from other creatures. That's why I've always opposed Ragnarok's plan to destroy the entire world of Azeroth. I lack the strength to fight against him, so I exiled myself to this remote place. Smodron was speaking the truth. The fire elemental density in his territory was obviously far less than in Lager's lair. Of course, if he had been recruited by Lager earlier, he would have been lying on the ground like the other stubborn fire elemental lords, and even his flame core had been dug out and devoured. Duque was quite satisfied with this guy. Very good. Come to my throne room, and I will grant you your rightful place. A huge door of flames opened in the void. Smodron did not resist and walked in directly. When he came back to his senses, he saw Duque surrounded by a group of fire demons and a group of demigods. Without much to say, he knelt down on one knee and swore his loyalty. The ceremony was completed. In terms of pure strength, Smodron was definitely the strongest among Duque's fire element subordinates. First come, first served. Duque had to give the loyal Majordomo a higher status. For the time being, apart from Duque, Majordomo and Nox were ranked second, and Smodron was third. Majordomo was ranked first in the fire elemental world. In the long run, Duque would consider giving Smodron the second position after he made a contribution. This was a check and balance, as well as a test of strength. But that was a matter for the future. Dominating the Land of Fire and becoming the king of one of the 4 major elemental realms, Duque's value would definitely rise. Considering Duque's characteristics as the pharaoh, it was not hard to imagine that he would definitely attack the Tidehunter's water elemental realm. But right now, everything was unknown. Attacking the Land of Fire was not only to help Mount Hyjal, but also to help the world of Azeroth. Duque could feel the gratitude from the half-asleep will of Azeroth. Since Duque killed Lager and got the biggest benefit, he was too embarrassed to take the rest of the spoils. Duque did not know what was going on with the mortal equipment in Lager's hands. In any case, Lager was dead, so he just dug out a bunch of mortal equipment from Lager's lair like a treasure chest. Kale, that speculated that this might be the equipment of the Titans who imprison Lager. No matter what, this batch of equipment was definitely the best batch he had encountered so far. Arathar's Eye of Flames was an epic longbow with a unique design of flames. The huge handguard on the bow also functioned as a gauntlet. Among the disc-shaped patterns on the bow, there was a sun-like core that burned with inextinguishable flames. Tyrande, Chandris, and Lilith naturally accepted such powerful bows. There were 3 of them, and they were of such high quality. A cloth armor, Flame Manager's Sash, was originally taken back by Lager after Majordomo Executus' betrayal. Now, it was more like a symbol of power that Duque had given to this fire demon leader. In addition, there were 3 Shulev. Staff of Annihilation. The shape of this staff and the head of the staff looked a bit like the holy light creature Nar. This was because every piece of gold and rose red metal in the shape of flames was suspended in the air, surrounding the energy gem that shone with a mysterious radiance at the head of the staff. It was not very powerful to call it an energy gem. In standard terms, it was an energy formation that was solidified at the head of the staff. The mysterious energy of destruction was fixed at the head of the staff in a whirlpool-like manner, constantly absorbing the surrounding elemental energy to provide more powerful magic power for the owner of the staff. This standard staff not only provided powerful bonuses in endurance and intelligence, but also had a super high additional bonus in magic circuits. It was no exaggeration to say that the increase in magic power far exceeded the total magic power of a Radiant Moon Mage. Only Breaking Dawn archmages and demigods like Duque could use this staff. There were 3. One was given to Kai, one was kept for Jaina, and Duque took one for himself as a souvenir. Kagwin Balrog King's Warhammer was actually a milk hammer that increased magic power. Because of its powerful comprehensive properties, as well as the increase in spirit and level acceleration, he kept it. When Riadaline returned, he stuffed it into the Blood Elf Knight leader's hands. The bastard Gavin Rad actually had the nerve to imitate Riadaline's speech, pinching his throat and shouting, "Boo! Are you trying to make me never return on the path of healing?" If Riadaline heard this, she would probably want to cry. It couldn't be helped. These days, the Holy Knight heroes were all triple elemental Holy Knights. Riadaline wasn't the best at fighting, so she was naturally thrown into the role of a healer. The other Holy Knights each had an offensive divine artifact. They couldn't let it go to waste, could they? The group imagined Riadaline, who couldn't complain, especially the Holy Knights, and felt weird. Especially the Hoof, who had been playing around with happy flames. She touched the back of her head in embarrassment and laughed foolishly. If she hadn't obtained Happy Flames, which was originally Morning Shadow, she would probably have been thrown into the healing team sooner or later. Chapter 1832. Here, let's give this to Riadaline too. Let's comfort her. Duque took out the two-handed hammer, Savra's Hand of Burning Annihilation, and prepared to give it to Riadaline. As the warhammer that Lager had used before, this weapon had a rather impressive foundation. Even though the warhammer had shrunk to a size that could be used by humans due to the lack of a massive amount of fire elements, it was a completely different concept in the hands of a true powerhouse. However, William objected. Magni will eventually return. In fact, not only does Muradin not want to use his brother's Balrog hammer, but Magni's spiritual imprint on the hand of the Balrog has not disappeared. Even Bu Lang, who was assigned to the melee team, lacks a suitable weapon. Duque was speechless. The Alliance's hero team actually lacked defensive warriors these days. There were many professions that could tank the boss: defensive warriors, defensive knights, wild druids, and even the new death knights. However, the people who entered the hero's domain were all unrestrained. Look at that group of bastard paladins, each of them carrying a divine weapon for damage output and whistling at the side. They could attack the monsters, but not tank them. William was a true berserker, and he couldn't possibly just give him a shield and let him tank the monster's aggro, right? What a waste of resources. In the end, the one who tanked the boss was Bronzebeard. Bu Lang, who was originally a hunter with a flintlock, was forced to go to the melee team because of the overflow of rangers in the Alliance's hero team. Dwarves had very high requirements for weapons and equipment. The top-notch God's Descent could increase the size of their equipment, but not their weapons. Hence, the Bronzebeard brothers were troubled by the need for a powerful weapon that could increase its size along with its body. After enduring for so long, the Hand of the Balrog was the most suitable weapon. Fortunately, there was an additional, Savra's Hand of Burning Annihilation. Next, almost all the spellcasters had a voltage transformer pulse capacitor. This thing sounded very scientific, but it wasn't scientific at all. Not only did it give Pharaoh a high increase in intelligence, but it also allowed Pharaoh to accumulate special free energy every time his magic attack was a critical hit, forming an electric charge that could be blasted out randomly. Finally, they attacked the Land of Fire. After wiping out all those who resisted, they left. It was necessary for everyone to have a set of work clothes. The Thief, Death Knight, mage, and druid all had the flame victor set. Paladin, priest, and warlock all had flame conqueror set. The warrior, ranger, and shaman all had flame protection set. It wouldn't be wrong to say that these were work clothes. In the end, these were the standard equipment left behind by the servants of the Titan giants. After killing the boss, it was the perfect time to let these items see the light of day again. Most of the time, it wasn't because of how good the set was. Even if they were all individual pieces, they wouldn't necessarily be much weaker than the set. Keeping the suit was purely a memento of an era. William, for example, had specially opened up a basement in the Storm Fortress to store his used armors. From the Courage and Strength sets in the early Molten Core era, to the Fearless set in the Middle Period, to the King of Emer set in No Scent. In terms of equipment attribute bonuses, these sets were already outdated. William couldn't bear to throw them away. Firstly, these pieces of equipment couldn't be given to anyone after being soulbound. Secondly, they were proof of his bravery. Even today, he would catch the little Prince Anduin Rin from time to time and let him look at his father's collection. It wasn't to prove how awesome his father was, but to let him learn from the vigor of a warrior. Unfortunately, little Anduin seemed to have gone further and further down the path of filth. In order to prove himself, this kid was already clamoring to join the Alliance of Heroes. He kept saying that Duque had stabbed Sargeras to death at this age. William's face was very dark because of this. The biggest beneficiary of killing the Fire Demon King was Duque. If not for Duque saying that there was no way to move the Land of Fire, Cenarius and the other demigods would be even happier. The fusion of space was not as simple as mortals thought. Since the Land of Fire was attached to the southern foot of Mount Hyjal, it couldn't be separated easily. Cenarius was a little indignant at first, but Isra came out in time to explain that even a true god couldn't separate such a large plane after fusing it. There was really no other way. Duque could only make a sacred oath in front of the guardians of Mount Hyjal. As long as he was still the boss of the Land of Fire, he would restrain the fire elemental creatures and not let them run around. In view of Isra's guarantee for Duque on this matter, Cenarius remained silent, which was rare. Moreover, the current situation didn't allow the naturalists to think too much, because the cataclysm brought about by the elemental invasion was still ongoing. The fire elemental world was settled, but the earth elemental world hadn't arrived yet. At least there was still wind and water. Duque got a group of wilderness gods out, and the Alliance of Heroes was once again in a position to attack at any time. This made the entire alliance heave a sigh of relief. In Theramore, Jaina, who welcomed Duque, pounced on him without any hesitation. Like a playful little girl, she hung on Duque's body like a koala. Duque smiled, hugged her light female body, and spun 1,080 degrees on the spot. Duque, I knew you'd always be the best. Jaina was extremely excited. Let me tell you, those barbarians from the tribe haven't taken down the Twilight Fortress yet. That's normal. Duque didn't care too much. With Brainless Roar in power, the tribe and the alliance were destined to go further and further apart. Duque couldn't wait for Brainless Roar to use up all the vitality of the tribe. From a certain point of view, it was indeed a solution to solve the food shortage problem by sending people to their deaths. Unfortunately, this was a classic case of putting the cart before the horse. A race with too few people could never become the ruler of a vast land. Yes, Duque, do you think the tribe can take down the Twilight Fortress? Jaina asked after a passionate hug. Before Duque could speak, there was a cold snort from the side. Impossible. No matter how weak my mother is, she's still my mother. Even if she resurrects, she'll definitely be stronger than me. The one who interrupted was naturally Onyxia. She sensed Duque's arrival at Theramore and flew over immediately. Duque curled his lips, feeling that the relationship between the Black Dragon King and his family was really interesting. On this point, Duque agreed. Sinestra is very strong. If it were the current Gurus, even with the Dragon Slayer Groll, they wouldn't be her match. As long as she's here, the tribe can forget about taking down the Twilight Fortress. Duque turned his head and looked west, where the battle was. He smiled and thought to himself, brainless roar. I'll just quietly watch you show off and quietly watch you court death. Chapter 1833. Is there anything we can do now? Xianxia seemed to be eager to try. Basically, we just wait. But since I'm back, you can go to the dragon's slumber temple in my place. Duque gently hooked the black dragon's little nose. Is there a fight? The black dragon looked up. Are you asking if there are weaklings for you to bully?
Right, there are.
Duque smiled. Even the black dragon blushed a little. All right, since it's master's order, Duque turned his head back. How are things on their side? When Duque attacked the Land of Fire, it wasn't that Duque didn't have time to attend to other things. It was because Uldum and Vasker were very special places. Unless Duque came personally, he couldn't just use the weave to invade them. All of a sudden, the information there was sent back to the most primitive way of sending messengers. In the end, Jaina was in charge of summarizing the information. It's the final battle. Over in Uldum, Torver's Lost City and the Hall of Origins have been settled. Aurelia and Sasha have already brought people to support Sylvanas. Brian Bronzebeard was the only one left in charge of the Hall of Origins. Sister Vasker said that she found 2 new demigods and is preparing to recruit them. At the same time, she has already attacked the tidal throne and is fighting against the sea monster sect leader Azamat. Jaina finished her report and added, "Should we send reinforcements?" Duque hesitated for a second, but still shook his head. No, since they chose to be independent, they should show their courage. They chose their own path, and they have to finish it even if they have to kneel. There was something else Duque didn't say. Unless they ask for reinforcements themselves, Duque raised his head and looked into the distance. He was silent for a long time. If they are willing to be the beautiful canaries in the cage, Duke does not mind giving them a crook of an arm to protect them from the storm. But they weren't just his women. They were also great heroes who shouldered the fate of the elves and led them into the future. Perhaps it was because of this persistence that the Windrunner sisters' beauty was so extraordinary and captivating. Jaina asked softly, before the Stonewall continent merges with Azeroth, is there anything else we can do apart from providing disaster relief and restoring production? Duque shook his head. Wait and hope. Duque really didn't interfere. If Queen Syriana couldn't deal with Al-Akir, who was known as Awal Trash, and Vashj couldn't deal with a sea monster suzerain, then how could he expect them to block the Burning Legion's attacks in his territory again and again in the future? Deep into the night, Duque was still anxious. Through the portal, Duque took out a large stack of reports from the Alliance and started to deal with them in the study room that Jaina had left for him. Every queen has her own bedroom and study in her own palace, or in her own summer palace. This was a form of respect and an honor. Duque accepted it very calmly. Hundreds of mages' eyes were reviewing the reports, and even more mages' hands were flipping through these reports. Just like that, Duque lay comfortably on the armchair behind the desk and let his spirit browse through the massive amount of reports. This wasn't something a human could do. Fortunately, Duque was no longer a mortal. Knock knock. There was a knock on the door. Come in. Even without asking, Duque knew that it was Xianxia at the door just from the soul connection. It was rare that the Black Dragon Princess actually came wearing a high-slit cheongsam tonight. The slit that reached to the waist showed the vacuum state under the cheongsam. A dignified dragon, but walking like a cat. She climbed over gracefully and went under the desk in front of Duque. Well, it was one of the daily dragon taming lessons, dragon spitting pearls. For Duque's convenience, Xianxia even made a pair of interesting black dragon horns on her head, which could be used as handles. There was another knock on the door. Jaina, who came in on her own, glanced at the humanoid black dragon princess under the desk. Without saying anything, she simply came up and waved her finger, and the pile of files was moved away by 2 additional hands of magic. Hey, I miss you. Faced with his beautiful disciple, Duque put on a serious face. Well, it seems that it's been a while since I discussed the academic problem of the reactions of different individual magic circuits in joint situations with you. Jaina winked. Master, please enlighten me. So, Duque changed from H oars to oars 7. While Duque waited for the progress with his mount in his left hand and a certain queen in his right hand, the Horde's attack on the Twilight Fortress finally came to an end. After all the hardships and the loss of almost 400,000 Horde soldiers, the elites led by Garush finally faced the last leader of the Twilight Fortress, the great traitor Gujar. If Gujar were still a simple two-headed ogre, brainless Roar probably could have cut him into pieces on his own. As a boss-level expert who had been greatly strengthened by the ancient god and Zoth, Gujar became a huge problem. Corruption of the ancient god. Corruption, acceleration, corruption, plague, corruption, distortion, corruption, absolute. Before him, everybody had to face a cruel test of willpower. The skill, betrayal, tempted every weak-willed warrior to worship Gujar on the spot and raise their battle axes to their companions a moment ago. The corruption of the ancient god, on the other hand, forced him to become a fallen one through all kinds of dark methods. When the corruption reached the second level of plague, he couldn't help but vomit, causing shadow damage to all his companions who were sprayed by the vomit. When the third level of distortion happened, he would automatically cause group shadow arrow damage to his companions around him. Finally, when absolute came, he would become a powerful warrior and increase his attack power by 100%, but it also meant death. When his companions betrayed him for no reason, Garush chose to kill them. When the old orc Eitrig, Thrall's advisor and expert, entered the distortion state, Garush also shouted, "Traitor!" He cut off the head of Eitrig, who was about to leave the team and was about to die by himself. The other chief's eyes were bloodshot. However, in the face of a great enemy, they could only endure the displeasure in their hearts and continue to attack Gujar. After a fierce battle, Garush finally cut off the two heads of the traitor ogre. The problem was that he put Gujar's head together with Eitrig's. Hang the heads of these three traitors on the main gate of Orgrimmar. Garush ordered. Chapter 1834. For some reason, Sinestra, who should have existed in the deepest part of the Twilight Fortress, was no longer there. From this point of view, it could be concluded that the Horde had finally won the war at a heavy price. But Garush's actions had undoubtedly completely ignited the conflict between him and the other chiefs. No, Eitrig is definitely not a traitor. Everyone saw that. It was Google's vicious skill. Are you saying that a warrior profession can use shadow arrow? Wajin roared, and he opened his arms fiercely. I didn't ask for your opinion. Trolls. Garush said contemptuously. I agree with Dworkin. Eitrig didn't want to attack us. Drano stood up, his burly figure even more oppressive than Dworkin's slightly thin figure. Garush was not happy. He pointed his left hand at the tip of Drano's nose, almost poking the forgotten leader's nose. Shut up. I don't need a dead man to influence my decision. It was I, Garush Hellscream, who led the Horde to win this war against the traitors. I am the only one who will be the victor of this war. Remember, dead face. In the Horde, only the winner has the final say. After saying that, he fiercely slapped the strong pectoral muscles on his chest, making loud banging sounds. Sparse cheers could be heard from the surroundings, but even more people were silent. Garush's "I" deeply stung everyone present. Not only the tribal chiefs, but even many of the elite beastmen who were clustered around the periphery felt that the word was rather harsh. Next to him, Cain, who was covered in blood from the battle just now, strode over regardless of the wounds on his body. The huge totem pole slammed into the ground, making a deafening noise and raising a lot of dust. Garush, what did you say? Are you saying that you are the only winner? Then what about the hundreds of thousands of soldiers sacrificed for this battle? Were those orcs cannon fodder? Were more than half of our Tauren, trolls, and Forsaken warriors just stepping stones for your prestige? The Tauren chief, who was as huge as a hill, stood in front of Garush, looking down at the great chief who was shorter than him. Garush already hated the feeling of having to look up to someone. Unexpectedly, Cain was so angry that he sprayed saliva in Garush's face. Any qualified leader with a bit of political sense would never say something like this. However, the reason why Gurus was called the brainless roar by many alliances was because of his 5 IQ and his personality of speaking without thinking when he was angry. Garush's first reaction after being spat on was to punch Cain in the bull's mouth. It was a powerful, swift, and ruthless left hook. Every tribe leader present saw that the old bull's slightly long face had been beaten until it was deformed. Even the muscles on the right side of his face had received a fierce blow to his gums. At least 3 of his teeth had been knocked out. His huge teeth flew out of his mouth along with the stench of blood. The old bull was a bit stunned. Then, words that made him even angrier rang in his ears. It was Garush's terrifying declaration. Pay attention to your identity. Cain, you Taurans are just vassals of us orcs. The tribe will always be decided by the orcs, and I am the great chief of the orcs. I am also the great chief of the tribe. Those who don't listen to the great chief's orders can die. Cain looked up and was shocked to see Garush making a throat-cutting gesture at him with his thick right thumb. Long-term injustice. Long-term suppressed anger. The humiliation he had suffered during this period of time. Everything was like a volcano that had been suppressed to the extreme and had to erupt. It erupted in Cain's heart. If the Taurans were a race that Thrall had conquered in war, perhaps Cain would choose to lower his head. But that wasn't the case. The tribe used an integration system similar to the alliance. In the tribe's declaration, the status of the various races was equal. Even though the orcs in the tribe were numerous and powerful, allowing the orcs to occupy an absolute ruling position, the tribe's declaration did state that other races could challenge the great chief's ruling authority. At this moment, Cain could no longer care about anything else. The Tauren chief pulled out the flag on his back and threw it in front of Garush. According to the tribe's tradition, Cain Bloodhoof requests to challenge you for the position of great chief. Come, if you really think you are the tribe's #1 warrior, then accept my Makra. Garush's face turned green and then red. Suddenly he roared and stomped on one of Kujar's heads. I've had enough. I've had enough. I've had enough of your complaints. I've had enough of your weakness. Why can't you weaklings obediently listen to the orders of the strong? Don't compare me to that weak fellow Thrall. He has already scrammed. Now, the great chief of the tribe is me, Garush Hellscream. Garush raised his bloody axe high. I accept Cain's challenge. Who else wants to challenge me? Is it you? Is it you? Or is it you? If you want to come, then come at me together. As he spoke, the blade of his axe was first pointed at Cain, then at Wajin, then at Dranos, and finally at the goblin prince Galawex. Wajin was not as impulsive as Cain, but everyone could see that his protruding fangs were trembling with anger. Garush, I don't want to fight with you. When you and Cain's Makra are over, I will make my decision. Wajin clenched his fists tightly. Anyone with a brain knew that unless Garush was completely defeated and Cain replaced him as the new great chief, it would mean that the tribe would split. A week later, at the south gate of Orgrimmar, which was opposite the main gate. It was a huge pit with a diameter of more than a kilometer formed due to the cataclysm. Tens of thousands of tribal warriors formed a huge circle, and at the bottom of the pit were the challengers and the challenged of Makra. Cain was the first to shout, Garush, I will defeat you. Under your leadership, the tribe will surely be destroyed. Ow, 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 Garush brandished his sharp axe. First, he roared at the sky, showing everyone his amazing lung capacity. The wild and primitive roar even suppressed the sound waves of tens of thousands of people for a moment. Then, the young orcs from Nagrand burst into even more enthusiastic cheers. This was their idol, the strong orc that they dreamed of, the role model. No matter what, the one who could lead them to victory was a great hero. Chapter 1835. Perhaps some people criticized Gurus for sacrificing too many of his compatriots for this war. But in the eyes of the traditional orcs, so what? Those who died were the weak. The weak were not qualified to have glory, power, and land. Gurus! Great hero Gurus! It was an earth-shattering cheer, a wild roar, and the shock of tens of thousands of people worshipping him. Garush raised his arms high. He loved the feeling of standing at the pinnacle of power and glory. He raised his father's single-edged axe, Bloodhowl, and waved it a few times. Although he hated his father, who bowed to the human leader, Duke Marcus, he reluctantly approved of his father's actions. At the same time, he felt that Bloodhowl was indeed useful. Of course, he didn't feel anything about his father using a knockoff version of Bloodhowl that he had gotten from a certain demon prince in Karazhan after someone gave him a family heirloom axe. As for feeling the so-called fatherly love, the brave orcs didn't need fatherly love, at least that was what he thought. Garush pointed at Cain from afar and shouted, "Cain, I'll give you one last chance. Admit your identity as the weak and kneel in front of me. But don't even think about it. Under your leadership, the horde will only be destroyed." Cain retorted. In the temporary auditorium near the arena, other than Grohl, who had an indifferent expression, the other chiefs all had nervous expressions. Cain's son, Bane, clenched his fists. As the military commander of the horde, Varrock Salyafar didn't want to see this happen, but he knew that the conflict had been completely intensified and could no longer be resolved through dialogue. Makra might be the only way to resolve the dispute outside of a civil war. With a deep sigh, the white-haired old orc commander raised his right hand high and put it down heavily. "I declare that Cain Bloodhoof's challenge to Gurus Hellscream's Makra begins." The taller and bullier Tauren chief was undoubtedly the strongest MT of the horde. Ever since Sar led the orcs west to the Kalimdor continent, Cain had been active at the forefront of the war. Since the famous Battle of Mount Hyjal, his majestic figure had been imprinted in the eyes of every horde powerhouse, and he had never retreated. His bravery and strength were obvious to all. In fact, as soon as the battle began, he completely overwhelmed Garush. Bang! With the exact same fierce charge, the two warrior heroes turned into a stream of light that was hard to be seen by the naked eye and crashed into each other in the middle of the arena. It was the same move, but it was a clash without any fancy tricks. Naturally, the stronger side would win. Facing Cain, who weighed more than a ton and also had innate divine strength, Garush was sent flying. Today, in the duel, Cain did not use his favorite totem pole. Instead, he used a long axe that was more suitable for his hands. Without giving Garush any time to react, Cain activated Spirit's Wrath, and then used Heroic Leap to catch up with Garush, who was flying backwards, and swung his axe down. Close combat. An inch shorter was an inch more dangerous. The price of gaining agility was that the side with a longer attack range would have an advantage. Therefore, there was another saying that an inch longer was an inch more powerful. The Oxhead chief was already stronger to begin with. Coupled with his full strength, the axe that came down from above forced Garush to forcefully parry it with Bloodhowl in midair. Bang! It was a fierce blow that shook the entire arena. Garush was sent flying like a cannonball. First, he crashed to the ground, then his entire body bounced up again under the impact. Finally, he rolled 5 times in a sorry state, plowing a thick line on the thick red ground before he finally stopped. There was an uproar among the beastmen, while the Taurens, Trolls, and Forsaken cheered. "Garush! Surrender!" Cain roared. Garush used Bloodhowl to support his body and said angrily, "Cain, you've angered me. Then I'll beat you until you submit." Cain rushed over with large strides, raised his battle axe, and launched a fierce attack. It was an unquestionable suppression. In terms of experience, 10 Garushes could not compare to Cain. In terms of strength and equipment, Cain also completely defeated Garush. The Oxhead chief was at the strongest moment of his life. Be it experience or physique, he was at his peak. Compared to him, Garush was too inexperienced. At some point in time, the beastmen's cheers had stopped. They stared at the brownish-red figure that was being suppressed with ugly expressions. At this moment, Garush was more of a defensive fighter than Cain. Of course, as a member of the Hellscream family, Garush had learned 70% to 80% of Lord Howl's jump slash. Seizing an opportunity, Garush fiercely counterattacked from the bottom up, finally using his axe to block Cain's battle axe. Garush seized the opportunity and jumped high. Because only then could he make up for the difference in height and physique between him and Cain, and better hit Cain's head. He wanted to chop down this ox-head chief who had embarrassed him. Unfortunately, he was too inexperienced, and the jumping route he chose was not good. Almost at the instant he jumped, Cain's left hand grabbed his leg and slammed him to the ground in a wrestling position. Garush spat out a mouthful of blood from the violent impact with the ground. This was only the beginning. Cain was like a broken cloth bag. He continued to grab Garush's foot and continued to smash him violently. Left throw, right throw, left throw, right throw. Cain, who was swinging his arms, directly humiliated the current chief with absolute strength. Garush was thrown so hard that the world spun and he could not hold on any longer. At this moment he waved Bloodhowl randomly, as if he had hit something. That's right. The tip of the axe blade had indeed slashed across Cain's chest. There were over 100 wounds on his body, and Cain, who was injured in almost every battle, did not think much of this injury. However, he immediately realized that his chest was violently numb, followed by an unbearable feeling of suffocation. Cain let go of Garush's leg and touched the wound on his chest. He saw that a considerable part of his blood had turned green. He realized what it was. Poison? Cain's eyes widened, and this scene was witnessed by Cain's son, Ben. Just as Cain's entire body was almost paralyzed, the furious Garush pounced over. The red battle axe he raised high emitted a demonic scarlet light. "Father, no," Ben cried out in shock. It was too late. Cain, who was poisoned, could not move at all. As the axe chopped down, thunderous cheers erupted among the orcs. Garush raised Cain's head high and let out a victorious roar. Chapter 1836. Not many people could understand what had just happened. Because of the distance and vision, everyone only saw that Cain was indeed suppressing Garush, but at the last moment, Garush directly killed Cain. The wild cheers of the crowd covered everything, including Bane's shout, "Poison! Garush's axe is poisonous. That despicable guy murdered my father." Did anyone hear that? Yes, all the Taurens around, including Wajin, Vark, Dranos, Garavix and others not far away, heard it. Although every orc around them was cheering and roaring, at least they all noticed this scene. The duel just now was definitely unreasonable. There was a huge conspiracy behind it. Delano jumped off the arena and flipped over Cain's body while suppressing the unhappiness in his heart. He immediately saw the green venom on Cain's chest and the strange green color on the edge of the great chief's blood roar. Wajin stared at this scene, then he suddenly turned his head and shouted, "Varrock Salyafar." Wajin called out a name. He not only called Varrock, who was the notary, but also the warlord who held the core military power of the tribe. Only Varrock was qualified to declare this a shameful makra, and only he could redress Cain's grievances. Varrock's mouth squirmed for a long time, but in the end he could not spit out a word. Declare this duel invalid? Easy. This kind of obvious evidence, as long as he shouted at Varrock, would be able to prove it immediately. But what about after that? Garush was bound to be despised by the entire tribe, and then who would lead the tribe? There was no talent in the tribe who could be the great chief. Although Garush was reckless, he at least killed the traitor and won. Except for him, no one could suppress the current young orcs. Perhaps it was a mistake to let him continue to be the chief, but who would dare to say that they would be able to lead the tribe out of this desperate predicament? Wajin? No, his identity as a troll was a huge problem. He could not suppress these young orcs. And although Garush had a bad personality, his personal strength was definitely the best in the tribe. Unless it was Gruul, no one, including Woking, could beat him in Makarali. Thousands of thoughts flashed through his mind. In the end, he sighed and lowered his head. Workin understood, and he did not blame Varrock for his choice. There was only endless sorrow. He turned around and walked past Bane, patting the next leader of the Tauren tribe who had witnessed his father being murdered. "One day, we will make Garush pay for this blood debt." Without waiting for Bane to respond, Wajin left the dueling field. The poison was not done by Garush, but by Magatha Grim Totem. But that was no longer important. That night, Garush decided to hold a banquet in Agrima and hung Cain's head on the city gate. Everything was blamed on Garush. That same night, Woken found Varrock, took out an oath written on wyvern skin, and declared to him, "From this moment on, I, Woken, on behalf of the Dark Spear Trolls, officially declare our peaceful departure from the tribe in accordance with the terms of the declaration made with Chief Sar. If Garush chooses to advance, we, the Dark Spear Trolls, will wait for the war in the Echo Islands. Of course, you can also raise your axe to me at this moment, and I will respond with my spear." Varrock was stunned, his lips trembling. Is this necessary? You have made your choice. The Dark Spear Trolls have also made their choice. That's all. Without accepting any persuasion, Woken left Varrock standing alone in the chieftain's hall. What was even more shocking was that almost immediately after, Dranos also found Varrock. The Forsaken have announced their departure from the tribe. This is not true, you are. I used to be an orc, and you used to be my father. But I am already dead, and the dead are not qualified to have the same rights as the living, are they? Garush didn't think much of me anyway. But I am now the leader of the Forsaken, and I have to be responsible for my people. So be it, father, if you can't stay. Welcome to Winterspring. Or, like our chieftain's father, Grom, you can rely on Duke Marcus. For you, that is also a good choice. Ignoring his father, who was completely speechless, Delanos used his ice-cold body to hug his father, who still had blood flowing and body temperature, then threw down an oath and left proudly. That night, the goblins and Taurens also announced their departure. Garrowex said in his sharp voice, "I don't mind owing people money, but I really mind being owed money. The tribe owes me too much money. Sar can't pay it back, Garush doesn't want to pay it back at all, and wants my life. The Rustwater conglomerate is finished with the tribe. You want the Rustwater conglomerate to return to the tribe? Yes, pay us the money you owe first." Ben said resolutely, "This is an unfair duel. The Taurens do not recognize Cairn Bloodhoof's glorious death. The Taurens have no intention of fighting against the tribe, but if the tribe chooses to attack Mulgore, the Taurens will fight to the end at Thunder Cliff." Overnight, the tribe fell apart. When Varrock handed the 4 contracts to give up the tribe's identity to Garush, who woke up with a hangover the next morning, Garush lost his temper on the spot. Betrayal. This is a shameless betrayal. Who gave them the right to betray the tribe? Garush flew into a rage on the spot. Varrock was unmoved. This was set by the previous chieftain, Sar, when he pulled the 4 major races into the tribe. At that time, all the chieftains of the tribe signed the agreement, including me representing the Blackstone clan, Sar representing the Frostwolf clan, and Grom representing the Warsong clan, which is your father. Back then, every chieftain agreed that all races were equal and had the right to leave peacefully as long as the tribe was not in a state of war. Garush clutched his slightly painful head. Isn't the tribe in a state of war now? Who ordered it to be lifted? It's you, chieftain. After you killed Cairn Bloodhoof, you personally announced this decision in front of thousands of orcs at the banquet last night, Varrock said in a deep voice. Garush's face suddenly turned red. He did not admit his fault, but instead vented his anger on the few chieftains. In any case, abandoning the tribe without permission is betrayal. I want to punish those who dare to leave the tribe behind my back. Garush waved his bloody roar. As the chieftain, of course you have the right to declare war. Remember, if you do this, it means that you are declaring war on the 4 major races at the same time, and they are very likely to fall to the Alliance. The most important thing is that we neither have a ship to the Echo Islands nor enough food to support an army of more than 100,000 to attack any other race. Varrock retorted coldly. Chapter 1837. By the way, the Kodo, which was the best at carrying things, had also been brought back by the Minotaurs. The Horde could only rely on hard labor. Or use werewolves to pull the carts. Garush was stunned. Didn't I order for the barren lands to be hunted? Varrock said, the barren lands don't have enough prey to support an army of 500,000. Even if the Great Rift Valley is an oasis, it won't do. In the later stages of the game, our hunters would have to travel more than 50 miles to hunt every day. To put it bluntly, the Alliance was waiting for the Horde to start a war. Varrock had sworn that no matter who the chief was, he would obey the orders of the one in the position. The brave beastmen would always keep their oaths. He was very satisfied with the beastmen's sense of supremacy. If the Horde did not listen to a single warning, he would immediately kill them. After more than 3 hours, the 4 women were finally taken care of. Duque, who was hugging one on each side, opened a bottle of 1982 Sprite. Kalia was a little confused. She tilted her head. Is that so? Ilucia, who was lying on the chaise longue, laughed. I knew it. In the business world, Duque, what you've been doing all this time is stealing raw materials. If you really want the Horde to be good, you should do what we did to help Kalia. Not only should we buy raw materials, but we should also build railways and factories in the places of production. We can also improve the local industry while doing fine processing. Garush was furious that the 4 leaders had left without saying goodbye. He did look down on the other races, but that did not mean he did not enjoy the pleasure of commanding them. Everyone? Jaina was stunned. But would the beastmen dare? The Horde has endured long enough. For 12 years, Duque, who had been advocating cooperation between the Alliance and the Horde in public and in private, finally admitted his attitude towards the Horde in private for the first time. After Garush came to power and tore up the trade treaty with the Alliance immediately started a Cold War. Duque opened a portal and went to several places. He dragged Kalia from Lordaeron, Ilucia from South Sea City, and Tyrant from Mount Hyjal. Even worse, he could not find a place to rob even if he wanted to. Actually, it was not as if there were none. The most prosperous places in Orgrimmar were Azhara and Grey Valley. Good news. Great news. Dooku was beaming with joy. Such a big event, we should find everyone to celebrate. Most of the time, Garush felt that the Tauren and Trolls were troublesome races that only gave him complaints about not being able to live. When they did leave the tribe, Garush immediately became angry again. The irascible Garush did not give up and asked for several methods, all of which were mercilessly rejected by Varrock. When Varrock reported this to Garush, the great tribal chief flew into a rage. His violent temper made every beastman who had no choice but to enter the great tribal chief's hall tremble with fear. Tyron was a little curious. Duke, did you want to destroy the Horde from the start, or did you change your mind midway and go against the Horde? In the end, he still suppressed his anger. Duque used his free hand to hold Tyron's Mount Hyjal as he said honestly, "From the start, I wanted to destroy the Horde. Unfortunately, I've never succeeded. Everything is decided by the times." He blurted out, "So many of us have died. Why is there no food left?" Only the Orc tribe was left, and they had no food or resources at all. Of course, in this life, because Duque tricked Jaina in advance, her young heart suffered the most indelible blow. Jaina, who was known as fair trade with the tribe, had always been like Duque. On the surface, she acted like a good person, but in private, she never gave up on scheming against the tribe. Without airships, there would be no large-scale transportation. No. Duque had probably opened a bottle of fruit wine that the Night Elves had stored for 82 years with a special method and poured himself a full cup. Last night, the goblins had retreated. What made Varrock despair was that the Rustwater Consortium had taken away all the valuable things made by the goblins, such as the hot air balloon airships that connected Orgrimmar to other places. The only thing that made Varrock feel lucky was that Gurus seemed to know the gap between them and the Alliance. He did not dare to start a war with the Alliance. Otherwise, he would really be looking for death. On the other side, when Duque, who was waiting for news from Odom and Vastur, suddenly heard that the Horde had split up, Duque did not say anything. He hugged Jaina happily and spun a few times on the spot. This was because she was the one that Duque had tortured the most. Almost every inch of her skin was planted with strawberries. He wanted to go on an expedition to destroy races like the Trolls and Tauren, but was told that there was no food. This surprised him. I couldn't hold it in. Duque pretended to be stupid. Varrock said coldly. Great Chief, we need food to fight a war. Our methods of transporting and storing food are too backward. For every bag of food we transport to the barren lands, we will lose 3 bags of food along the way. In order to destroy Gujar, Orgrimmar's granaries are almost empty. This caused the Horde's control over the various regions to drop by several levels. These words were nothing to a traditional orc, but they pierced deeply into Varrock Salufar's heart. For a moment, old Varrock almost wanted to pull out his axe and give this idiotic chief a good beating. In order to deal with the invasion of the Firelands, the Dalajan had already arrived at Mount Hyjal. The Alliance had stationed troops in Grey Valley, Azhara, and Theramore's Dustwallow Swamp. Among the 4 women, Jaina had the most complicated relationship with the Horde in history. Before Theramore was hit by the magic bomb, focusing Rainbow, Jaina had a very long honeymoon period with the Horde. Jaina, who was said to have sold her father out, had a very good relationship with her rumored male friend, Thrall, which caused her father trouble. The Wyverns alone could not meet the speed and quantity of transportation. The Horde did not have a railway, so all transportation would return to the more primitive era of animal power. When Duque brought all the harem he could find to Karazhan's bedroom, Duque laughed and began to break the armor of the women. Where the Duke Divine Sword was, the terrifying scene of 999 consecutive strikes shocked everyone present. Oh, if you didn't say it, I would have thought that you, Duke Marcus, were a selfless hero who only cared about the public. But that's good, it proves that I didn't misjudge you. By the way, why are you purposely tormenting me? Jaina also held a glass of wine, but she glared at Duque with dissatisfaction. Chapter 1838. Elucia burst into laughter. Silly queen, it's fortunate that the man you're with is Duque. Otherwise, you'd still be counting the money after being sold. Kalia was dissatisfied. If it wasn't for Duque forcing me, I wouldn't have wanted to be the queen. I might even become the #1 adventurer in the Alliance, as well as a professional cleric in the Alliance's hero group. Kalia's words made sense, and Elucia was defeated. The 2 girls immediately became a ball of fun. That beautiful spring scenery. Duque almost wanted to end his time as a sage and have some fun with someone else. Jaina stopped him. Let's talk business first. Otherwise, I won't be able to feel at ease. All right. Duque was a little disappointed. Don't be like this, teacher. I'll do whatever you want with the students later. Answer my question first. Duque perked up. All right. How are we going to face the Horde? Jaina asked. Duque thought for a moment. First of all, the Alliance must continue to maintain a lukewarm attitude towards the big tribes in a broad sense. If the tribe is divided today, Wajin will leave the tribe with his subordinates, and we will immediately rush to the Echo Islands at night, make some promises, or put some race under our protection. The Alliance will be at a disadvantage. Oh! Even a veteran politician like Tyrant was surprised, much less a political noob like Kalia. Jaina blinked. Are you afraid that the tribe will think that the division of the tribe is a conspiracy of the Alliance? Duque shook his head. Most importantly, even though Brainless Roar had torn the tribe apart, the tribe's cohesion were still there. If Garush had killed Thrall in the duel yesterday, I might consider doing it right away. But as long as the tribe is not rotten to the bone, once Sal returns, the tribe will reform into a fist. Isn't it a good chance now? Jaina asked. Duque sighed. It's a chance, but it's not enough. Our alliance is too strong and gives the tribes too much pressure. As long as there was any sign of trouble in the alliance, even if the 5 tribes had irreconcilable internal conflicts, they would immediately unite again. And the key is that the alliance still lacks a righteous cause. Tyrant nodded. Yes, the alliance is indeed not a violent organization. The alliance clearly lacked a reason to wipe out the entire tribe. However, would Garush give the alliance such a reason? His brain wasn't good, but he shouldn't be that crazy, right? At least he hasn't declared war on the alliance yet. No, I think, maybe everyone underestimated his stupidity. Of course, it's just that he doesn't have the chance now. When he does, Duque scrutinized it. In this life, the tribe was even more chaotic than before, and the division was even more severe. In the end, it was because Duque's own arrangements over the years had taken effect. He commanded the alliance to suppress the Horde's expansion, causing the Horde's territory to shrink by at least half. At the very least, the Tirisful woodland was no longer controlled by Undercity, and the Long Song forest was no longer controlled by the Blood Elves led by Lord Thema. With less territory, the corresponding resources were far less than in history. Naturally, their ability to resist pressure was even worse. In order to ensure the survival of the beastmen, Gurus consumed the population and completely plundered the resources of the other 4 races for the beastmen to use. Naturally, the backlash was even greater. It could be said that in this matter, the alliance had already gained the absolute upper hand. Unfortunately, Nisario did not die, and Brainless Roar did not further seek death. Duque wanted the alliance to make a move, but it was still lacking a little bit. Although he was happy, Duque could only suppress the ecstasy in his heart and not announce anything to the public. At this time, Kalia said a little strangely, "Yes, speaking of which, you've also accepted Sister Iral. Why didn't you call her for your secret celebration, Duque?" Duque had a strange look on his face. It was Jaina who giggled and said, "Of course we have to find her for the celebration, but there are many things that can't be told to her. If she knows, all the Drenii will know." Indeed, Hoof was a little mature. Unfortunately, she still had the mentality of a typical young girl. Anything good in one's heart could never be hidden from the people around them. It was such a big thing that Duque wanted to secretly deal with the Horde. It was good enough that the various tight-lipped queens knew about it. Even if all the participants of the Throne Council had a tacit understanding, some things should not be announced in advance. At this time, Hoof sent a magic message. Duque, I heard that the Horde has split. Don't say anything, come over immediately, I have something important to inform you." When Hoof stepped out of the portal, Duque did not say anything and directly pointed his sword at Hoof. After a round of Duque's 999 godly swords, the 4 women even came up to help put down Hoof, causing Hoof to exhale more than it inhaled. Then Duque slowly informed Hoof that his attitude towards the Horde was to wait and see. The butterfly effect caused by Duque the butterfly had really changed Azeroth too much. Originally, in history, the Cataclysm should have been Sal's most glorious moment. Sal, who had been promoted to the Shaman of Salvation because of the Cataclysm, should have been widely praised throughout the entire world and received the greatest recognition from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. Unfortunately, with Duque's existence, it seemed that there was nothing for Sal to do. At this moment, in Nagrand, Sal, who was wholeheartedly practicing the way of shaman, suddenly received news from the spirit of the earth. What? Duque killed the fire demon King Ragnaros and officially replaced it as the supreme lord of the fire elemental world, and forced all fire elemental creatures to serve the Alliance mages first? Sal's heart was like a level 12 hurricane. Because the broken planet Draenor, where Nagrand was located, was too far away from planet Azeroth. In the absence of special magic communication, it was normal to rely on the elemental spirit to transmit the news for such a long time. He felt terrible in his heart. He gave up his power and left the Horde, of course, because he was forced by the political situation. What he really wanted was to protect the world of Azeroth, to become a demigod, and to gain the recognition of him and the tribe from the Sleeping Dragon Temple. At least in the general trend, he would not be left behind by the Alliance. Otherwise, if every world-destroying event had nothing to do with the tribe, and if the Alliance really wanted to attack the tribe, the Long Sleep God Temple and the Protectors would definitely stand by and watch, or even help the Alliance. At that time, the Horde would really be finished. But Duque sitting on the throne of the King of Fire was definitely destroying Sal's plan. The way of shaman was to communicate with the elemental spirit, which was a relationship of request. It was absolutely different from Duque's, "I'm the Emperor, you do whatever I want you to do." Duque made the fire elementals serve the Alliance first. To put it bluntly, in the future, the shamans of the Horde would not be able to use fire elementals to attack the Alliance. Otherwise, they would turn around and burn the shamans first. This feeling of being stuck at the source was like being strangled by a rope that could pull you up and hang you at any time. Chapter 1839. This is bad. Duque will definitely let Sylvanus, who is already a demigod of wind, deal with Al-Yakir, and let Vashch, who is also a demigod, enter the throne of tides. If all three elements are controlled by the alliance. Thrall did not dare to continue imagining it. But I have to change direction. The priority should be the earth. This is my last chance to overtake them. Thrall was unknowingly getting a little impatient. He did not realize that impatience was the worst thing to do when it came to the earth. Due to the lack of information, Thrall did not realize that there was a mortal called Magni Bronzebeard who was already so much ahead of him in the path of the earth. While Thrall was getting impatient, Duque was enjoying the clumsy pillow talk. Duque, let me tell you, beastmen are all brutal fellows, sob sob sob. Don't talk, savor it. Duque said righteously as he pressed down on her head and held her horn. Hoof rolled her eyes, but could only bury her head in her work. Hearing that the tribe was splitting, the Dreenii, who had a deep hatred for the beastmen, naturally had other thoughts. So-called forgiveness was *T to the middle and lower class Dreenii. You killed my entire family. Do you expect me to say, long live forgiveness and wait for you to kill me? Duque saw Hoof's clumsy but hard work and gave her some hope. Before the crisis of the world's destruction is over, the alliance will not make any moves. At least he managed to appease Hoof and the Dreenii. Anyway, those who understood would naturally understand. The key was that Duque did not say anything from start to end. After the tribe split, Duque waited bitterly for 3 days before he finally received the first piece of good news. As a demigod of the Azeroth weave, Duque was extremely sensitive to changes in the elements. After all, the biggest access points for the elements in the weave were fire and ice. The fire element flowed unimpeded, and the weave could receive as much as the fire elemental world overflowed. There was no need to be too serious in monitoring the fluctuations of the water element. Before this moment arrived, the supply of water elements was unstable. Tidehunter Neptulin had never communicated with Duque. Ever since Duque established the weave, he had been walking the path of Hydraxia's water elementals. It wasn't very generous, but at least Duquedasis could give him a 5% share. Suddenly, Duque was pleasantly surprised to find that the share had jumped from 5% to 51%. In the next second, the magic communication with Vashch that had been blocked for a long time returned to normal. In the magic mirror, Vashch's long red hair fluttered in the deep sea, giving off a mysterious and hazy beauty. She respectfully crossed her arms on her shoulders and bowed towards Duque on the other side of the screen. Then, she transmitted her soul voice. Dear Master, your most loyal servant, Celia, did not disappoint you. In the tidal throne, she slew the king of sea monsters, Azamat, and saved the water elemental lord, Tidehunter Neptulin. After my persuasion, Neptulin is now willing to follow me and serve you as the supreme ruler. Well done, my Celia. When you come back, I will reward you well. This conversation contained too many hidden words from both sides. Vashch clearly referred to herself as a demigod in all public occasions. But in front of Duque, she would always be the little maid that Duque saved in Azhara's palace. And Duque called her Mycelia. This kind of recognition was the biggest reward for Vashch. There seemed to be some kind of liquid in the water from the corner of Vashch's eyes. That should be tears. There was another image in the magic mirror, and it immediately switched to Neptulin. Neptulin was a huge humanoid creature, almost 10 stories tall, similar to Lager. He had a dark blue humanoid upper body and a cone-like water elemental lower body, as if he was wearing a skirt. He had an almost rectangular face and hair that looked like 5 curved pieces of blue marble inlaid on it. A sapphire the size of a carriage hung on a huge golden chain. It looked very strange. He was not in good condition, because he had just been tortured by the sea monster lord. Huge whip marks and sucker bite marks could be seen all over his hard body, which looked a little like blue marble. Of course, Duque also saw the scars of swords and arrows. This scene made Duque want to laugh. Needless to say, this was the mark of Vashch, persuading Neptulin on behalf of Duque. Among the 4 elemental lords, Neptulin was famous for his wisdom. During the ancient war of the Dark Empire 25,000 years ago, Neptulin the Tidehunter was always on guard against Al-Akir's treacherous schemes. He also controlled his subordinates to prevent them from attacking the stronghold of Sarazen the Mother of Stone. When the armies of fire, wind, and earth fought each other on the land of Azeroth, the Tidehunter would cleverly divide and conquer his enemies. Every time the enemy tried to flee, Neptulin would sweep away the waves so high that even the tallest mountain in Salazarn would feel ashamed of itself. Neptulin liked to play with his prey, dragging them into the water and letting them escape. Sometimes he would banish an unfortunate victim to an isolated island and let him enjoy the torment of the tides and whirlpools. He would usually try to identify who could not survive in the water for a long time and drag them far away before dealing with the rest of his opponents. He especially liked to extinguish flames, and he had a deep hatred for the fire elementals. Neptulin the Tidehunter was the ruler of water, lakes, rivers, and oceans. All water elementals and creatures that used water and cold as their main abilities would respect him. However, today, after 25,000 years, the saying, "a fallen phoenix is no better than a chicken," was used to describe Neptulin. Because he had died and revived once, his strength was no longer what it used to be. Otherwise, there was no way to explain how a mere sea monster could defeat him. In Warcraft, he was not even qualified to be the boss of a 5-man dungeon. From the fact that the final boss of the title throne was Azamat and not him, it was obvious how useless he was now. The great demigod of the Weave, Duke Marcus. "I, Neptulin, offer all my loyalty to you. From today onwards, your enemies are my enemies. My territory is your territory." It was good to talk to smart people. Stubbornly stubborn would only waste more effort. Smart, spineless people were the easiest to subdue. Duque first turned his body into ice elementals, then opened a portal. In the next moment, Duque's figure appeared in the tidal throne in the deep sea. There was almost no light in the dark sea. However, with his elemental senses, Duque could clearly sense everything around him. Vashch immediately offered Duque a portion of the elements here. Chapter 1840. 1%, 10%, 30%, 51%. The elemental share was the control of the entire water elemental world. In a sense, controlling more than half of the elemental world was equivalent to controlling a super reservoir. As a ruler, he could control how much water was released. It was like fish in a dry swamp or accumulating small amounts. An elemental world was a little different from a reservoir. It itself was like a huge nuclear reactor. The difference was that it did not flow out nuclear energy or electricity, but would continuously produce elements. This was why the elemental world overflowed with elements towards Azeroth and other planes since ancient times. Feeling that his soul touch had spread to more than half of the elemental world, including the tidal throne, when Duque absorbed 51% of the elemental share, he stopped. "Master?" Vashch was a little puzzled. "Silagia, you take another 30%. Usually, I will give you an additional 10% of the usage. As for how you distribute it, that is your business." Vashch did as she was told. The eyes of Vashch's core subordinates all lit up. Unstable Hydas, Deepwater Lord Carathilas, Meroger Tidewalker, Yusler. They had followed Vashch for the longest 10,000 years, and the shortest was at least a few hundred years. What were they after? Wasn't it just more power, more territory, and more authority? Duque believed that Vashch could control this group of guys very well. Perhaps in time, there would be a few new water demigods born, thanks to the fact that the ancient god Enzos did not directly intervene in the affairs of the water elemental world. The elemental share here could be said to be quite complete. When Vashch killed Urzamat, she found it very funny. Urzamat actually took 40% of the elemental share and beat Neptulin, who had 30% of the elemental share, like a dog. The remaining 10% was left for Neptulin, and Duke Hydas's share was raised to 9%. The share of the entire water elemental world was decided in this way. Perhaps some people would ask why Vashch, who only had a little elemental share in the water elemental world, would beat Urzamat up? That was because the total amount of elements that Vashch controlled was higher. In fact, the Azeroth main world and the elemental world were two separate entities. The elemental concentration in the elemental world was undoubtedly the highest. Although the concentration was high, the total amount was small. The Azeroth main plane's elemental concentration was low, but the total amount was many times greater. It was as if the entire Land of Fire had descended into the main plane and only occupied the small southern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The water elemental realm was about the same size, just the size of Valshi. That was why Ragnaros and Al-Ikir dreamed of occupying all the fire and wind elements on the main plane. Although the elements realm was the source of elements, the absolute quantity of elements in the main plane could also consume the pure elements in the elements realm. This was why Duke had applied to planet Azeroth's will to make Vashch a demigod under the direct jurisdiction of the planet. Having managed Lordamir Lake for so long, Vashch's cards were definitely better than Azamat and Neptulin, who had torn apart the water elemental plane. For Duke and Vashch, controlling the water elemental realm was equivalent to controlling the entire Azeroth water element from the source to the branches. Although the total amount of water element on the entire planet was too shocking, far beyond the scope of a demigod's control, having both the branches and the source was unimaginable. When the water elemental realm was completely integrated with the main plane, it was foreseeable that the share of water element would become more and more valuable. The law of nature was that the winner took all. Neptulin could, of course, sense that his old rival Ragnaros was already dead. Facing Duke, the super boss who destroyed Lager, controlled the fire elemental realm, and dominated the powerful demigod Vashch, Neptulin did not dare to even fart. He had to be a coward. The water elemental realm had completely changed. From today onwards, Duke would be the ruler of this place, while Vashch would rule over the tidal throne as Duke's representative, controlling this place. Master, I still have something important to do. Please let me report to Karazhan, Vashch said very respectfully. Okay. After Vashch arranged the defense here, it was actually a territory for the 4 water element masters under her. Then she and Duke returned to Karazhan through the portal. Although Vashch looked submissive on the outside, through the soul connection, Duque could clearly feel the excitement in her heart. Almost as soon as they stepped into the bedroom, Vashch turned back into the appearance of a high elf and wrapped around him like a beautiful snake. She clearly had a pair of long legs, but she gave Duque a soft and boneless feeling. Master. With a sickeningly sweet voice, Vashch displayed a kind of passion that did not match with a water element demigod. Duque unsheathed his godly sword, followed by sword drawing technique and sword return technique. The seemingly monotonous 2,888 consecutive stabs had an unimaginable fiery effect. In the end, Vashch, who overestimated herself and wanted to challenge Duque, ran out of stamina and was put to the ground, limp like mud. Duque raised his eyelids. This is your important matter? Nothing is more important than confirming Master's care for me. If Master doesn't trust me, then I will continue to be my personal maid. I don't want this water elemental realm. What Vashch said made sense, and Duque was speechless. This was the difference in the way people thought because of their different backgrounds. Vashch, who was born as a noble but had been a maid for Queen Azhara in the palace for a long time, still had the habit of relying on the royal power or the strong. That was something that could not be changed. Just like in the original history, Vashch, who was once independent, finally found Illidan, the unreliable Doc, just because she felt that Illidan was stronger than her and that there was a better future with Illidan. So she died tragically in the Serpent Shrine cavern. In this life, she saved her soul and saw Duque as the only salvation for her body and mind, so she became Duque. Duque's focus and desire were even above her personal wishes. Duque could not help but like this loyal dog-like attribute brought about by changing history. It was so worry-free. After being intimate with Vashj for an entire day and night, Duque suddenly received an unexpected visitor, Kale, that Sunstrider. Oh, what a rare guest. I didn't expect you to visit me. This was not a polite remark. Although Duque had helped Kale back then, and Kale was very grateful to Duque, for the sake of his subordinates, Kale had to create a small circle independent of the Alliance's power circle. This group of people was under orders from the Alliance, but also a bit like an organization like Silver Dawn, with a certain degree of independence. Chapter 1841. For the sake of that group of people, and not wanting to provoke the Windrunner family, which held the power of the Blood Elves, Kale, that's relationship with Duque was always a little ambiguous. Kaizi would accept any of Duque's arrangements or orders, but he rarely came to find Duque in private. That's glanced at Vashj, who was standing beside Duque and dressed like a maid, with a dignified bearing and lustful eyes. He seemed to be a little concerned, but he also seemed to be used to it. His reaction was a little strange. What? I've already reported Vashj's attack on the water elemental realm at the throne meeting. Duque found it strange. Kaizi sighed. No, I'm just a little envious of the trust between you two, master and servant. In the past, in the circle of high elven nobles, even husband and wife would have all kinds of dirty political deals or frame each other. Duque did not know how to continue the topic. Instead, it was Vashj who blushed, which was rare. Kaizi changed the topic, stood up, and bowed deeply to Duque. When he looked up, he said in a straightforward manner, Duque, I'll also say it directly. I hope to offer my soul and loyalty to you. Needless to say, Duque was a little stunned. He wanted to say, you must be joking, right? But he immediately realized that Kaizi was unusually serious. What's wrong with Kaizi? Kale, that's continued, I spent the first half of my life as a prince. I used to think that seeking happiness for my compatriots and people was the whole meaning of my life. I've always encouraged myself with this. Unfortunately, my father's matter completely turned my world upside down. Duque did not say anything and let Kaizi continue. That was my father's sin, and also the sin of the Sunstrider surname. Since I'm a member of the Sunstrider, I don't regret it, nor do I blame my father. I calmly accepted this sin. I worked hard for a long time, hoping to still do something for my compatriots after removing the Sunstrider surname. Unfortunately, I discovered that Sylvanas Windrunner did a better job than I did. At this point, Kaizi sighed deeply. I'm at a loss. I'm at a loss for myself. I'm at a loss for those who believe in me and want to follow me to the death. We don't know where our future lies. Duque interrupted. You have already proved your determination and courage to fight against evil with your actions. Have you forgotten the cheers of the Blood Elves? Of course not. But we want to do more, not just for the Blood Elves, but also for this world that is constantly being invaded by evil. Because of this, my followers and I yearn for greater power. Duque frowned. You can't find your own path to power? That became agitated, and his voice became more sonorous. No, I found it. But this is the only path that suits me, and it requires your absolute trust. Duque realized what Kaizi was referring to. Vashj, who was beside Duque, also had a fierce look in her eyes. As long as Duque gave her a look, she would not hesitate to attack Kale. Duque sat comfortably on the sofa and lay back down. His voice was a little unfathomable. You want the share of the fire elemental world that I control? I know it's shameless of me to make such a request as an outsider, but I don't have a better way, and I believe that this can solve the problem of my followers having similar symptoms of magic addiction in the future. So in exchange, my followers and I are willing to offer you all our souls. At this point, Kale, that's no longer bowed, but knelt down deeply to worship Duque. It had to be said that Kale, that was very accurate in this matter. Unlike in the fire elemental world, Duque did not have a capable assistant like Vashj in the fire elemental world. So Duque only symbolically gave Majordomo 5% and made him a manager. As for the other two guys, Sharnox, the fire demon hunter who had joined Duque in advance, gave him 3%. As for Madron, who would have become the fire elemental lord because he had chosen the tall among the short in history, that was too bad. I'll give you 1%, take it or leave it. Duque monopolized 91% of the shares and was in an absolute position of dominance. Duque's ambition was not just the fire elemental world. He had to at least take care of the arcane, fire, and frost elements to become a true god. He could not have so much energy to concentrate on managing the fire elemental world. It should be said that Majordomo was enough to manage it. The problem was that Majordomo was too weak. Even if he became a demigod, his combat power was still as high as 5 among demigods. Duque's real representative in the fire elemental world should be like Vashj, who could fight and had his deep trust. That was ideal. Kale, that's proposal scratched his itch. After all, at the end of the day, Duque could not absolutely trust Majordomo. That guy was forced to surrender by Duque. Since he could surrender to Duque, there was no guarantee that he could surrender to other powerhouses in the future. In this life, Kai Zi did not fall into a state of madness because of his clansmen. His pure heart was still worthy of praise. There was no need to say who the balance in his heart was leaning towards. Duque crossed his fingers and placed them on his knees. He pretended to think for a while before nodding in agreement. But I agree. There are many people who are willing to offer their souls to me in exchange for power, but not many of them have character and will that I recognize. You happen to be one of the few, so I agree. That's kowtowed heavily and said loudly, "Thank you, Master. I'll go and call my followers over to pay their respects to the Master." A few minutes later, Kai Zi brought a group of subordinates and filled Duque's reception room. "Greetings, Master," dozens of elves said in unison. Duque had to admit that Kale, that was quite popular. In addition, the nobles of the mages were quite unhappy with the power of the once lowly ranger faction. Not every mage who had lived for thousands of years and was used to being a big shot could condescend to be ordered around by the ranger faction. Therefore, a large number of mages joined Kale, with the help of the weave, just Kai Zi's subordinates alone could form a new Silver Moon Council. From now on, Master will only have the great weave demigod Duke Marcus. Eichel, that Sunstrider, am just one of Master's servants. Everyone, please recognize your new identities. Kai Zi instructed. Yes, dozens of people answered in unison. Kai Zi turned to Duque. Master, you can choose any one of them to be your guard or maid. Back then, Kai Zi had given Duque an astromancer, Solarin. It was unknown if he was addicted to giving them away, or if the high elves had the habit of giving girls away. In any case, Duque was still a little uncomfortable. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.